I was never the kind of guy who liked crowds. Cities made me tired. Everything felt too fast, too loud, too much. So after working nonstop for almost 8 months, I took a week off and drove up north. I needed to be alone. I needed the woods. Just trees, dirt, sky, and silence. I picked a spot I had found once before while hiking through the edge of a national forest. It wasn't an official campsite, which was exactly why I liked it. No people, just me, my gear, and the wild. Took me most of the day to get there. A dirt road led a few miles into the forest. Then it was about an hour's hike up a small trail that wasn't even marked on most maps. I had my pack loaded with food, a small tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, bear spray, knife, and all the usual stuff. I also had a canister to hang my food in a tree, because I knew bears were real out here. They weren't fairy tales, and they didn't knock politely. By the time I set up camp, the sun was dropping behind the tall pines. I cleared a small patch near a boulder, pitched my tent, then gathered firewood. The air smelled like pine needles and dry leaves. I could hear birds settling in, and in the distance, the occasional snap of branches from small animals. Everything felt calm. I made a small fire, cooked some rice and canned beans, ate quietly, then sat there until the fire died out. I didn't feel scared. Not yet. That first night was quiet. Almost too quiet. I didn't sleep well. Every time I heard something, a stick breaking, a rustle in the leaves, I opened my eyes and waited. But nothing ever came close. Just the natural sounds of the woods doing their thing. Still, I kept the bear spray right next to my head and the knife in my sleeping bag, just in case. The second day went by fine. I hiked around a bit, followed a dry creek bed, saw a deer. I even climbed a small ridge and watched the treetops shift in the wind like green waves. It was the kind of stillness I missed, but something felt off. I couldn't name it, just a small tension in my gut, like I was being watched. It's the kind of feeling you ignore because it doesn't make sense. But I noticed that the birds got quiet a few times. Not completely silent, but like they were listening, waiting. That night I was more alert. I kept the fire going longer. I didn't want the dark pressing in so fast. When I finally crawled into the tent, I lay there a long time, eyes open, listening to the forest shift. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. when I heard the first real noise. Something large moved near the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet from the tent. Slow steps, heavy. Not a raccoon, not a deer. Too deliberate. Then it stopped. I held my breath and didn't move. My ears were straining so hard they hurt. For a while, nothing. Then the sound of sniffing. Close. Real close. My heart was pounding. I reached slowly for the bear spray and held it with both hands. Then something brushed the side of my tent. Not hard, just enough to make the fabric shift. I didn't move. My whole body was frozen. I didn't even want to blink. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, but it was probably just 10 minutes. Then I heard it move again. Slow steps moving away. Eventually, the sound faded. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When morning came, I got out and checked the area. There were prints in the soft dirt about 10 feet from the tent. Large, white, claw marks. Bear. Definitely a bear. It hadn't torn anything up, hadn't gone for the food, which I had hung high in a tree about 60 feet away, but it had come to investigate. I knew the rules: don't panic, don't run, don't leave food near your tent. But knowing the rules doesn't make you feel safe. I considered leaving, packing up and heading down, but part of me didn't want to run. I had prepared for this. I had read enough survival guides, watched enough videos. I wasn't stupid. I just needed to be more careful. So I stayed. I built a better fire pit that afternoon, made sure the food was hung even higher, and cleared a larger area around my tent so I could see anything that came close. I even slept with a flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other. That night, nothing happened. Or if it did, I was too tired to wake up. But the next morning, the food canister was gone. I had hung it with a rope over a high tree limb, far from camp. It should have been there. The rope was still hanging, but the canister was gone. I searched the area and found it about 50 feet away. Smashed open, food gone. Bears are strong, smart, and stubborn. That wasn't news to me. but seeing it firsthand was different. That's when I decided I'd leave the next day. I had enough food left for one more night and a quick breakfast before hiking out. No reason to test my luck. I spent the rest of the day watching my surroundings, barely even leaving the camp. I didn't build a fire that night. I didn't cook, just ate a few cold things and sat in the dark, listening. Every crack, every snap of a branch felt sharper, louder. I barely blinked. Around midnight, I heard the breathing. Not footsteps, not sniffing, breathing, deep and low just outside the tent. I didn't move. I didn't reach for anything. I just lay there, staring at the fabric in front of my face. I could hear its breath. In, out, slow, heavy. It was so close I thought I might feel it if I reached out. Then the tent shifted again, this time harder. Not a brush, a push, like something testing it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just waited. After maybe a minute or two, the breathing moved away again. I listened to it fade. Then I waited another hour, just in case. Then, very slowly, I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and looked around. Nothing, but I could smell it. A heavy, musky smell. Bear. I didn't go back inside. I packed up what I could, threw the rest in the bushes, and started walking with my flashlight. I didn't care about the trail. I just wanted to get out. I walked all night, flashlight shaking in my hand, every shadow looking like a shape. The forest at night is not peaceful when you're running from something. I didn't stop until the sky started turning blue and I hit the dirt road again. My car was still there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there with my hands shaking on the wheel. I drove until I hit a gas station 2 hours away and just sat in the lot for a long time. I didn't know how to explain it. Nothing had attacked me. I hadn't been mauled or chased. But the feeling of something watching me, something strong enough to crush me if it wanted, stuck with me. Weeks passed. I told a few people, but not in full detail. Most of them thought I had just gotten scared. Maybe I had. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. And I knew how close I came to being another story someone reads in the news. Now I still go hiking, still love the woods, but I never camp alone anymore. And I never forget what it feels like when a bear breathes just inches from your face. And you can't do a thing except hope it changes its mind. Because out there, you're not the top of the food chain. It was the middle of August when I took some time off work and decided to go camping alone in a remote part of a national park I hadn't explored before. I wanted complete peace. No people, no cell signal, nothing but tall trees, dirt trails, and the sound of the forest at night. I had been to several parks before, but this one was farther out, less popular. It was nestled in the northern part of the state, surrounded by dense pine woods and high ridges. No attractions, no gift shops, just untouched wilderness. That's what I wanted. I packed enough for 5 days. A tent, sleeping bag, bear canister, freeze-dried meals, water purifier, small stove, flashlight, extra batteries, map, compass, knife, and first aid kit. I made sure I was ready. I told my brother I'd be out of signal for a few days and gave him a copy of my trip plan, which area I'd be in when I'd be back. I always do that. I reached the entrance of the park in the afternoon and checked in with the ranger station. The guy there looked surprised I was going that far in alone, but he didn't say much. Just made a mark on the backcountry log and gave me a warning about recent bear activity farther west. I wasn't going that way. I parked my truck at the last access point, packed my gear onto my back, and headed in. The trail was rough. Lots of roots, fallen trees, overgrown in some places. It wasn't maintained like the usual tourist paths. I liked that. I hiked for nearly 6 hours before I reached a clearing near a slow, winding stream. Big rocks, scattered pine needles, and soft, uneven ground. Perfect spot to set up camp. I pitched the tent near a large boulder that would block the wind. Cooked my first meal over the small stove, ate, and just sat for a while watching the sky turn dark through the tree branches. The forest got quiet fast after sunset. Only sound was the occasional rustle of wind or snap of a twig. But it wasn't scary, not at first. It was peaceful, natural. I lay in the tent listening to the chirps of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl until I fell asleep. Next morning, I got up early, filtered water from the stream, ate, then packed a smaller bag for a day hike. My goal was to loop around a nearby ridge and scout a path deeper into the woods for the next night's camp. I hiked uphill most of the day, sweating, legs sore from the weight and the incline. The air smelled thick of pine and old moss. I saw no one, not even tracks, just deer prints and once what looked like bear claw marks on the side of a tree. Old ones. By mid-afternoon, I started heading back. Clouds were starting to gather, and I didn't want to be out there if it rained. I made it back to my camp by dusk. Everything was just as I left it, but something small felt off, hard to explain, like the air had shifted slightly. I told myself I was just tired and hungry. After eating, I sat by the stream watching it flow when I noticed something about 30 feet upstream. On the far side, under the shadow of a leaning tree, there was what looked like a small pile of sticks. But they weren't natural. They were stacked like someone arranged them. A small triangle leaning against the tree. Not large, maybe the size of a shoe. I stood there staring at it for a while, wondering if someone else had been there before me. But I hadn't seen a single footprint besides animals, and there were no paths nearby. Still, I figured it might have been an old marker or even something a ranger left for a survey. I ignored it and went to bed. That night, I had a harder time sleeping. The forest didn't sound the same. It was quieter, too quiet. I kept waking up, listening. Around 2 in the morning, I thought I heard movement near the tent. Slow, careful steps like someone trying not to be heard. I froze in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Circled once, maybe twice, then stopped. I lay there, muscles tense, hand on my knife, not moving. Eventually, I must have dozed off again. Next morning, I stepped outside and walked a slow circle around the tent. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing. But a few feet from the stream, I found something new. Another triangle of sticks. This one a little bigger and closer. Someone or something had made it during the night. I kicked it over and stood there for a long time, scanning the trees. Not a single sound came from the woods. That day I didn't hike. I stayed close, watched the woods, kept the knife on me. I built a small fire, more for the noise and the illusion of control than warmth. I felt watched, all day. Every time I looked into the trees, I expected to see someone standing still in the shadows. But there was nothing. At some point, I thought maybe another camper was messing with me. Maybe someone saw me come in and decided to scare me. But no one had signed in on the ranger's book, and I'd seen no signs of life anywhere. That evening, right before dark, I walked the edge of the woods surrounding my camp, maybe 50 yards out. That's when I found the animal. It was a rabbit, or had been. Its body was torn open, ribs snapped, guts spilled. But what made me stop cold was the way it was laid out, arms stretched, legs folded under, like it had been posed. And right beside it, another triangle made of sticks. Larger, sharper. I backed away. My heart was racing. I didn't know what this meant, but I knew I wasn't staying another night there. I packed everything in a rush and decided I'd hike back toward the truck and make camp closer to the trailhead. It was almost dark by the time I started hiking. My headlamp was dim even with fresh batteries. The trail was hard to follow in the dark, overgrown, twisted. After about an hour, I realized I must have taken a wrong turn. The trees looked wrong. I didn't recognize the slope I was on. The map wasn't helping. Everything looked the same in the dark. My compass said I was going south, so I kept going. At some point in the night, I started seeing more of the stick symbols. First one on the ground, then one in a tree. Some were high up, too high for me to reach. Others were small, hidden between roots. All the same shape. Some thin and delicate, others thick and heavy, jammed into the dirt. They were everywhere. I walked faster, breath shallow, every crack of a branch making me spin around. At one point, I swear I heard breathing. Not an animal panting or moving, but deep, slow breathing, human, or something trying to sound human. I turned off my headlamp and crouched behind a tree. Waited longer. Nothing. I kept moving until I couldn't go anymore. I found a flat spot between two fallen logs, didn't even pitch the tent, just unrolled the sleeping bag, pulled it over me, knife in my hand, and waited for morning. When the sun came up, I realized I had no clue where I was. The terrain didn't match the map. The compass still said south, but everything around me was unfamiliar. And then I noticed something strange. A boot print, but not mine. A different tread pattern deep in the mud going west. I followed it. One print, then another, then nothing. Like whoever made it disappeared. Then I saw more of the symbols. This time arranged in a circle around a large pine tree, maybe a dozen of them, like a shrine. I was done. I turned around and walked fast, picking the most open path, no trail anymore. I didn't care. I just wanted out. Around noon, I finally hit a familiar trail. I recognized a rock formation I'd passed on the first day. Relief hit me hard. I followed the trail back toward my truck, still hours away, but now at least I knew where I was. Every now and then I looked back, half expecting to see someone behind me, but there was never anything. When I finally reached my truck, the sun was low and the wind had picked up. I threw my gear in the back, started the engine, and drove fast down the dirt road. Back at the ranger station, no one was there. I signed myself out and left. Didn't sleep that night. Drove straight home. I told my brother I cut the trip short because of weather. I didn't say anything about the symbols or the animal or the breathing. I didn't want to sound crazy. I spent the next few days thinking about what had happened, trying to make sense of it. Maybe some survivalist lived out there. Maybe it was a trapper's way of marking territory. But the patterns were too specific, too deliberate. A week later, I went online to see if anyone else had reported something similar in that park. I found a forum post buried deep from a guy who had hiked the same area 2 years earlier. He mentioned strange stick formations and dead animals. Said he felt watched. Said he left early. He never posted again. That was the last time I camped alone. Now, even when I go with friends, I stay close to main trails. I don't wander. I don't go off path. And if I ever see those stick symbols again, even one, I'm leaving and I'm not looking back. It was supposed to be just a weekend trip. A simple break from the city noise, a chance to sleep under the stars, breathe fresh air, and get away from screens and traffic. I had planned it carefully. Just me, my small tent, a backpack with essentials, and a map that showed a remote campground deep in the woods, miles away from any town or highway. I wanted solitude, and I got exactly that, but what happened there changed everything I thought I knew about being alone in the wild. I arrived at the trailhead early on a Friday afternoon. The sun was warm but not too hot. The sky a bright blue with a few scattered clouds. The air smelled clean and earthy. The path was narrow, covered with fallen leaves and pine needles, winding deeper into the forest with every step I took. The sounds were calming, birds chirping, the wind brushing through the tall trees, the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt. I felt a quiet thrill in knowing I would be far from people for the next couple of days. My backpack was heavy but manageable. I had packed carefully. Food wrapped in plastic, a water bottle, a first aid kit, a flashlight with extra batteries, a fire starter kit, a sleeping bag, and a small stove. The tent was light and easy to set up. My phone had no signal here, but that was the whole point, no distractions. I followed the trail for about 2 hours, moving steadily uphill. The forest grew thicker and darker as the sun began to lower, filtering through the leaves in golden beams. I finally reached the clearing marked on the map. It was a perfect spot for camping. A flat area surrounded by tall pines and oaks, with a small stream running nearby. I set up my tent with care, hammered the stakes into the ground, and laid out my sleeping bag inside. Next, I collected some dry wood for the fire. Took time to find good pieces, but I was used to this kind of work. Soon enough, I had a small pile ready. I started the fire using the fire starter kit and watched as the flames grew steady and warm. I boiled some water on the stove, heated my canned beans, and ate slowly, savoring the quiet and the simple satisfaction of being outdoors. As night fell, The forest came alive with different sounds. Crickets chirped endlessly, an owl hooted in the distance, and the stream bubbled gently nearby. I felt calm, almost peaceful, in the fading light. After eating, I sat close to the fire, watching the flames flicker, the shadows moving with the wind. I took out my flashlight and did a last check of my gear. When I finally crawled into the tent, I felt tired but happy. The thin walls of the tent muffled the outside noise but did not block it completely. I heard twigs snapping somewhere outside, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the steady flow of the stream. I was alone but not afraid. Not yet. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. My body was tense, and my heart was pounding. The forest was dark except for a faint glow from the dying embers of the fire outside. The tent fabric pressed lightly against my face as a cool breeze slipped through a small gap in the zipper. I lay still, trying to calm down, listening carefully. There was a noise, soft at first, barely noticeable, like something heavy moving slowly through the underbrush. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I tried to go back to sleep, but the noise grew closer, more deliberate. The sounds of snapping twigs and brushing leaves were too rhythmic to be random. It felt like someone, or something, was moving just beyond the edge of the clearing. My mind raced. I remembered all the warnings I'd read about camping alone, about bears, mountain lions, or even people who might be out here for their own reasons. I grabbed my flashlight carefully but did not open the tent. I shone the light through the thin fabric, but the darkness outside was thick. Nothing moved in the beam. Then the noise stopped. I waited. Minutes passed in silence, but I could still feel the tension in the air, the weight of being watched. I sat up and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The clearing was empty, the fire long gone, and the stars shining cold and clear overhead. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, from the far side of the clearing, I saw a figure, tall, dressed in dark clothes, moving slowly but with purpose. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, eyes wide, staring. The figure stopped at the edge of the trees, looked toward me, or at least in my direction, then disappeared into the shadows. I closed the tent zipper fast and sat back down, my mind racing. Someone was here. I was not alone, and they had been moving around the clearing while I was asleep. Fear gnawed at me, but I forced myself to think clearly. I checked my phone again. No signal. The nearest ranger station was miles away. I had no way to call for help. I decided to stay as quiet as possible, keep my flashlight close, and wait for dawn. I told myself the figure was probably just another camper or a hunter who got lost, but something felt wrong. The way they moved, careful, slow, almost stalking, was nothing like a casual hiker. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and alertness. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to grow closer. I did not sleep. When the first light of dawn finally came, pale and weak, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I cautiously unzipped the tent and looked around. The clearing was empty again. The fire pit had cold ashes, and there were no fresh footprints except my own. But then I saw it. A small, carefully placed pile of rocks, arranged near the edge of the clearing, right where the figure had stood. It looked deliberate, like a marker or a sign. I packed up as fast as I could, every sense on edge. I moved quietly, scanning the trees, expecting to see the figure at any moment. But the forest was silent. No movement, no noise. I followed the trail back the way I came, eyes peeled and heart racing. I tried to keep calm, thinking logically about what I would do if I saw the figure again. I imagined shouting, running, or climbing a tree if I had to, but I never saw anyone. After about an hour, I reached the trailhead. There was a car parked where I had left mine, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away as fast as I could. Later, when I was safe at home, I looked up reports about the area. There had been stories of people disappearing in those woods, strange hikers seen at night, and warnings about trespassers or squatters living deep in the forest. Nothing official, just rumors. I never went camping alone again, and I still think about that night, about the figure watching me in the dark, about the pile of rocks left behind, and about how close I came to something I could barely understand. The forest is beautiful, but it's also wild in ways that no map can prepare you for. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster. It's the real unknown, the people and dangers hiding just out of sight, waiting quietly in the night. The sun had just started to dip below the thick line of trees when I finally reached the clearing. It was the kind of place I had driven past countless times on my way out of town, but I'd never stopped before. This time, I had decided to spend the weekend camping alone, hoping to disconnect and enjoy the quiet. The forest stretched around me in all directions, tall pines and oaks standing like silent guards under the dimming sky. The air was crisp, cooler than I expected for a summer evening, but still comfortable. I could smell the damp earth, pine needles, and the faint scent of wildflowers. I dropped my backpack and began setting up my small tent, pulling the stakes tight and securing the rainfly even though there wasn't a cloud in sight. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and rocks, but it was the only spot I found flat enough to sleep on. After I finished, I gathered some dry wood from around the clearing. It took longer than I thought because a lot of the wood was damp or covered in moss, but finally I had enough to build a decent fire. I arranged the pieces carefully, placing smaller twigs underneath bigger logs, then struck my matches and waited for the flames to catch. The fire crackled and hissed, sending up a small plume of smoke that drifted lazily among the trees. I sat back against a log, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The warmth was welcome against the chill that was settling in with the dark. Around me, the forest was already alive with sounds. The rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, the distant call of an owl. I watched the flames flicker, feeling a quiet sense of peace. This was why I had come out here, away from the noise and distractions. As night deepened, I lay back on the ground, staring up at the sky through the gaps in the canopy. Stars sparkled in sharp points, clearer than I had seen in years. The Milky Way stretched like a pale ribbon across the black. I felt small and calm at the same time, a part of something much bigger. But as the fire burned low, a new sound began to creep into the background, something different from the usual forest noises. At first, it was faint, just a distant rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. I froze, listening closely. The sound was slow and steady, not the quick, sharp crack of a small animal. It was deliberate, heavy steps on dry leaves and twigs. My heart started beating faster. I wasn't alone. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. I swept it around the clearing, the trees, the edges where the shadows were deepest. Nothing moved. The forest seemed still again. I tried to convince myself it was probably a deer or some other animal, but the sound had been too heavy, too careful to be just an animal wandering by. I thought about packing up and leaving, but the thought of walking alone in the dark on unfamiliar trails was worse. I stayed by the fire, adding more wood, letting the flames push back the dark. Still, I kept my eyes and ears sharp. Hours passed. The sounds faded away, replaced by the usual night noises again. I started to relax, telling myself I was just imagining things. The forest was peaceful. I was safe. I slept fitfully, waking at odd times to the crackle of branches or distant animal calls. Each time I opened my eyes, my heart raced until I realized nothing was there. By morning, the sky was pale gray, and a light mist curled around the trees. I packed up my gear quickly, eager to leave the clearing behind. On the trail back to my car, I noticed something strange. The path had scuff marks, deep and uneven, as if something large had dragged itself through the dirt. I stopped and looked closer. The marks were too heavy and uneven to be an animal's. They looked like footprints, but the shape was wrong. Too wide, with a strange, dragging pattern. I felt a chill run down my spine. I kept walking, my pace quickening. The forest seemed darker now, even in daylight. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was no sign of anyone or anything following me. When I reached my car, I was soaked in sweat despite the cool morning. I locked the doors and sat inside, heart pounding. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. I stared at the forest line one last time before starting the engine. Driving away, I thought about what I'd seen. The heavy footsteps, the sounds at night. It wasn't a ghost or a fairy tale. It was something real and dangerous, something I didn't understand. The woods held secrets I wasn't meant to find. That night stayed with me, a warning I couldn't ignore. The forest wasn't just a place of peace and beauty. It was alive in ways that weren't always friendly. I never went back to that clearing again. I needed a break from everything. The noise, the people, the endless messages, work deadlines, and phone calls. It all felt like too much. So I decided to disappear for a while. Not in the dramatic way people post about online, but for real. Just me, my backpack, and the woods. I picked a spot deep in the forest of northern Washington, somewhere far from roads and cell towers. I had researched this place for weeks. It wasn't a national park, just regular, rough wilderness that people mostly avoided unless they were hunters or serious hikers. The kind of place where if something went wrong, you were on your own. I drove as far as I could on the gravel forest roads, then parked my car by a bend in the trail. I hiked in about 6 or 7 miles with all my gear on my back. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Just birds, wind in the trees, and the sound of my boots on dirt. Felt like I was stepping out of the world. I set up camp on a small ridge that overlooked a stream. There was a clearing with just enough space for my tent, and the tree cover above was thick, which I liked. It made the place feel enclosed, safe. It was already late afternoon when I finished setting up. I boiled water, made instant noodles, and ate slowly while watching the sky darken through the canopy. The first night was calm. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the forest settle into its nighttime rhythm. Branches creaked, insects buzzed, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out now and then. I wasn't scared. I'd done solo camping before. I knew the sounds. I slept fine. The second day was more of the same. I didn't have a plan beyond relaxing and wandering. I walked up and down the ridge, followed the stream for a while, climbed over fallen trees, and even found some old game trails. No people, no tracks, just nature. It was peaceful, but something changed that second night. It started with the feeling that I was being watched. Not constantly, just now and then. You know when you're alone, and you suddenly feel like someone's behind you, but when you turn around, there's nothing? That's how it felt. Came and went. Sometimes I told myself it was just a shift in the wind, or an animal nearby I couldn't see, but it didn't sit right. Later that night, I was lying in my tent, just trying to sleep. I had my headlamp turned off, and only the moonlight came through the tent's mesh top. I heard something outside, something moving. At first, I thought it was a deer or a raccoon. The woods are full of life at night, but this was different. Sounded slow. Not clumsy like a bear, not light like a fox. It was like a person trying to move quietly through brush, but not quiet enough. I held my breath and waited. The footsteps came closer, slow and dragging, like someone testing the ground with each step. Then they stopped. I waited for them to start again, but they didn't. I stayed frozen in my bag for maybe 20 minutes, listening. Nothing moved. I eventually dozed off, but not deeply. Every time I heard a noise, my eyes shot open. The next morning, I checked around my campsite. No prints, no signs of animals or people. Just the usual broken twigs and scattered leaves. Still, I couldn't shake that weird feeling. I told myself I'd stay one more night and then head back. That third day was strange. I felt unsettled, jumpy. I tried to distract myself by hiking, even went off trail for a bit, but I kept looking over my shoulder. Couldn't relax. I knew something was off. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had seen me. I returned to camp before dark. I didn't want to be walking around in the woods once the sun went down. I made dinner fast and cleaned up everything before the last light disappeared. I double-checked that my flashlight was working, made sure my knife was by my sleeping bag, and zipped myself in early. I lay still, hoping I'd just pass out and be done with it. But I didn't sleep. At some point around midnight, I heard it again. The dragging footsteps. This time, I was sure it was a person. I don't know how, but you just know. The weight, the rhythm, it wasn't an animal. They moved around the tent slowly, almost circling it. Then I heard breathing. Soft, shallow, right outside the tent wall. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The sound was so close that I could almost feel it through the fabric. Then it stopped. I waited for something, anything, a voice, a zipper, a sound. But there was just silence. Not even the forest noises I'd gotten used to, just silence. Eventually, I passed out, probably from exhaustion or fear. I don't know. I woke up when the sun was already up, and the forest was alive again with sound. I stepped out of the tent and looked around. Nothing. Everything looked exactly how I left it. But then I saw something in the dirt, just a few feet from my tent flap. Footprint. Barefoot. I stood there staring at it for a long time. It wasn't mine. I had worn boots the entire time and never went barefoot outside. This was something else. The heel mark was deep. Whoever it was, they stood there a while. I packed up that morning without eating. I didn't even bother folding the tent properly. I just shoved everything in my pack and started walking back toward the car. Every sound made me flinch. A snapping branch, a bird flying up suddenly. Even the wind made my skin crawl. I kept checking behind me, half expecting someone to be there. No one ever was. I made it back to my car in about 2 hours. My legs were shaking the whole time. Once I got inside and locked the doors, I just sat there for a while, breathing, waiting. I looked out through the windshield and watched the trees. Nothing moved. When I finally turned the key, the car started on the first try. I drove down the long dirt road fast, tires skidding on gravel. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? There were no injuries, no photos, nothing stolen. Just a weird footprint and a sick feeling in my gut. But something had been out there. Something was watching me. A few weeks later, I started looking into stories from that area. There weren't many, just scattered posts on hiking forums and old local rumors. But I found a thread where a guy described hearing footsteps and breathing outside his tent in the same forest. No one believed him either. That's when it really hit me. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a spirit or some old legend. It was a person, a real person, hiding in the woods, watching campers, creeping up on them in the night without being seen. Someone who didn't want to be found. Maybe they lived out there. Maybe they were just passing through. But they were out there. And they knew I had been there too. I never went back to that forest. I still camp now and then, but only at sites with other people nearby. Places with cell service and ranger patrols. Sometimes when I'm alone in my tent, I still hear noises. A twig snapping, leaves moving. My heart always jumps. And then I remind myself, it's probably just the wind, or a deer, or a raccoon. But I also remember that footprint, and how someone stood outside my tent that night, listening to me breathe. I went alone that weekend. It was mid-August, and I had been craving a quiet break away from the noise of the city. Work had drained everything from me. Sleep, energy, and even interest in people. I wanted to be where there were no voices, no engines, no clocks. Just trees, dirt, water, and my own breathing. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, which now, looking back, was one of the first mistakes I made. I picked a spot in the southern stretch of the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming, a few hours' drive from where I lived. I'd camped there before, but only once, and it was far enough off the marked trails to feel private, but not so far that I felt lost. I had mapped out the path on my phone, took screenshots in case service died, and packed up my gear the night before. I got to the edge of the forest a little before noon, parked off a dirt road, and loaded my pack. There were no other cars in the area. The air smelled like pine and dust. I locked the car and headed out. The first few hours were perfect. Quiet, sunny, warm but not hot. I moved slowly, taking in the clean scent of the trees, the crunch of dry twigs under my boots. I spotted a few squirrels and a doe crossing a slope in the distance. The trail was overgrown in spots, but I followed a small stream that led up into a gentle hill, remembering a flat area near the top that would work as a campsite. I reached the spot by early evening. It was a clearing maybe 50 feet across, with soft grass and a few small boulders around the edge. The stream curved around one side, flowing gently. I pitched my tent in the center and collected dry branches from the woods for a fire. I wasn't expecting anything more than peace. I had no idea what the night had in store for me. Dinner was simple, just some noodles boiled in a pot and a protein bar. I ate by the fire and watched the light fade between the trees. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. I could hear insects buzzing and a few distant calls. Birds maybe, or something else. I've always liked that part, when the dark takes over and the forest feels like it's folding in on itself. I killed the fire before bed and zipped myself into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The stars were bright through the mesh ceiling. I lay there for a long time just listening. That's when I heard the first sound. It was faint, like a branch snapping far off in the woods. I didn't think much of it. Animals are always moving around. Deer, raccoons, maybe a fox. But then another sound came, closer this time. A slow, heavy step. One, then two. Then it stopped. My body stiffened. I turned my head toward the direction I thought it came from, but I couldn't see anything. No moon that night. Total blackness outside the tent. I waited. Nothing. After 10 minutes, I forced myself to relax. Probably a deer, I told myself. A big one. Maybe it caught my scent and ran off. I turned on my side and closed my eyes. But then it came again. This time it was louder. Leaves rustling. A sharp crunch of twigs. Closer now, just beyond the edge of the clearing. The weight of each step sounded heavier than a deer. Slower too. I sat up quietly in the tent, my heart picking up speed. I remembered I had bear spray in the side pouch of my backpack, but the backpack was outside the tent, leaned against a rock, not close enough to grab without stepping out. I stayed still for what felt like forever, listening to the slow, uneven steps circling the edge of my campsite. Whatever it wasn't moving fast. It wasn't afraid. It was taking its time. I tried to remember everything I knew about animals out here. Black bears were common. Cougars too, though they're quiet. But this didn't sound like a cat. It sounded heavier. Then I heard something that changed everything. A wet, low huffing sound, like air being pushed out through a thick nose. Not a growl, not a snort, just a deep, steady breath. It wasn't a bear. I didn't know what it was. I moved slowly to unzip the tent just a little, barely enough to peek through. Total darkness. Couldn't see a thing. I reached for my flashlight in the side pocket of my sleeping bag and clicked it on. Bad idea. The moment the beam hit the clearing, I saw something at the edge. Two eyes, low to the ground, reflecting back at me with a cold, yellow glare. They blinked once, then lowered. The animal didn't run. Crouched lower, like it was studying me. I didn't breathe. My hand tightened around the flashlight. Then it moved, fast. It darted sideways, low and quick, vanishing into the trees. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled to zip up the tent again. My breathing was shallow, chest tight. I couldn't stop shaking. I sat there, frozen, waiting for the sound again. But the forest had gone silent. No bugs, no wind, just stillness. I stayed like that until the sky started to lighten, maybe 3 hours. I didn't sleep. Every noise made me flinch. Every creak of the trees felt like something was about to rush the tent. When the sun finally came up, I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out. Everything looked normal. My gear was untouched. The trees stood still. The fire pit was cold. But the tracks were there, just beyond the tent, pressed into the soft mud near the stream. They weren't bear tracks. Too long, too narrow, almost like giant dog prints, but wider at the base. Deep too, heavy animal. I followed them a few feet before stopping. They circled the campsite, twice, once wide, then again tighter, closer to the tent. It had been watching me. I packed up everything in record time. Tent down, food stashed, gear loaded. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I just kept looking over my shoulder as I hiked back to the car. The forest felt different on the way out, brighter but wrong, as if something was watching from behind every tree. I didn't stop for water. I didn't take any breaks. I just moved as fast as I could without breaking into a full run. I got back to my car a little after noon, covered in sweat and dirt. I opened the door, threw everything in the back, and locked myself inside. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. I didn't go back to the woods for a year after that. I later found out what it probably was. After doing some digging online and reading through some local wildlife reports, I learned that there have been rare sightings of large wolves in that region. Not regular gray wolves. These were described as bigger, heavier, lone hunters not part of a pack. Some called them timber wolves, but the size didn't match up. One report mentioned a large predator that had been seen moving through the forest, preying on deer and sometimes livestock. One hiker even said he saw something the size of a black bear but shaped like a wolf. Whatever it was not scared of people, and it hunted alone. Maybe it wasn't hunting me, maybe it was curious, but the way it circled, the way it moved in the dark, the way it didn't run from the flashlight, it didn't feel curious. It felt practiced, like it had done this before. That night changed the way I think about being alone out there. Nature doesn't care who you are. The forest isn't evil, but it isn't kind either. It doesn't think. It just is. And sometimes you find yourself in the path of something that sees you not as a threat or a friend, but just another piece of meat. Now, when I camp, I go with someone. I tell people where I'm going. I carry a knife and keep the bear spray inside the tent, right next to me. I still love the woods. I still go, but I never forget those eyes, that silence, and the sound of slow steps outside my tent. There are no ghosts in the forest, but there are animals that move like shadows. And if you're unlucky enough to catch their attention, you'll understand what real fear feels like. Not because of what they are, but because they're real, and they're out there, waiting. The sun was setting low behind the thick pine trees as I arrived at the small clearing I'd picked for my solo camping trip. I had been planning this trip for weeks. A simple getaway from the noise of the city, the constant buzz of my phone, the endless flood of emails and deadlines. I wanted to disappear into the woods for a few days, to feel the quiet, to breathe fresh air, and to remind myself what it was like to be alone, really alone. I pulled my car off the narrow dirt road and parked next to a small creek that trickled softly. The ground was soft with fallen pine needles, and the smell of earth mixed with the scent of pine was heavy in the air. I took my backpack out of the trunk, which held my tent, sleeping bag, food, water, and a small first aid kit. I didn't bring much, just the essentials. I was confident I could handle the outdoors. After all, I'd camped before, though never completely alone and never this far out. The first thing I did was set up the tent. The ground was a bit uneven, but I found a spot clear of rocks and roots. I hammered in the tent stakes, feeling the metal bite into the soil. The tent's fabric smelled new and clean. It felt good to set up my little home for the next few nights. After that, I gathered firewood. I walked around the clearing, breaking dead branches from the trees, stacking them carefully near the fire pit I made from some stones I found. The fire was important. It wasn't just for warmth or cooking. It was a signal, a comfort against the dark. I had read stories about people feeling uneasy in the woods at night, and I wanted to avoid that. I didn't want to be scared. As the last rays of sunlight slipped away, I built a small fire. It took some effort, but I finally got it going. The flames crackled, throwing flickering shadows on the nearby trees. I sat on a log nearby, watching the fire dance and listening to the soft sounds of the woods, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, the gentle flow of the creek. It was peaceful, but also a little strange. There was a feeling of emptiness that you don't get in the city, a kind of silence that almost feels heavy. I ate a simple dinner, canned beans heated over the fire, some crackers, and a little chocolate for dessert. Tasted better out here than it ever did at home. I leaned back against the log, staring up at the stars. The sky was clearer than I'd ever seen. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a silver ribbon. After a while, the fire burned down to glowing embers. I went into the tent to settle for the night. The air was cooler now, and I zipped the tent door shut. I lay on my sleeping bag, listening to the forest at night. The sounds were different now, more alive, more urgent. Owls hooted far off. Some animal moved in the underbrush, maybe a raccoon or a deer. I felt my heartbeat slow as I drifted toward sleep. But then, around midnight, something woke me. At first, it was a faint noise, barely there. A scraping sound, like something dragging itself over the dry leaves just outside the tent. My heart jumped. I stayed still, breathing quietly, trying to listen. The noise came again, louder this time, closer. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. It was heavy, slow, deliberate, like footsteps, but not quite normal footsteps. Something was out there, moving close to my tent. I sat up, my eyes trying to pierce the dark fabric of the tent. My phone was on airplane mode, and its screen dim. I didn't want to make noise or light, not knowing what was out there. The sound stopped for a moment. Then it started again. This time, it wasn't just one sound, but several. I could hear something dragging, scraping, even a low thud. Felt like something big, something heavy. My mind raced. Was it a wild animal? A bear? A moose? But the noises didn't match any animal sounds I knew. And why would an animal stay so close to a human campfire? I remembered I had my small knife in my pocket. I slipped my hand over it, feeling the cold metal. The thought of defending myself gave me a strange mix of fear and resolve. The sounds circled the tent, sometimes close to the door, sometimes moving away then back. It was like whatever was there was exploring, trying to figure out what I was. After what felt like hours, the noises faded. I stayed awake for a long time after, listening for anything else, but the woods fell silent again. The next morning, when the first light came through the tent, I crawled out carefully, trying not to make noise. I wanted to see if anything was left behind from the night. Near the fire pit, I found something that made my stomach turn. There were heavy footprints in the soft dirt. They were unlike any animal track I'd seen. Too large, too deep, and oddly shaped. The prints circled around my campsite, crossing over themselves, and stopped just a few feet from where my tent had been pitched. Along with the prints were deep scratches on the nearby tree trunks, marks made by something with strong claws. I felt a chill, but I also realized something important. Whatever had been out, there was not a wild animal, at least not in the usual sense. The tracks were too large for a bear and too strange for any other creature native to these woods. I packed up my camp quickly, my hands shaking. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just some local guy, a hunter or a hiker who passed through. Maybe those sounds had some explanation I couldn't see. But as I loaded the last of my gear into the car, I glanced back one more time. The woods looked calm and peaceful in the daylight. Birds sang, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back again. The strange thing is, even after I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Back in the city, the noise and chaos should have buried that feeling. But it stayed with me, quietly at first, then stronger with each passing day. I researched the area, trying to find any record of strange animals or people living in those woods. Nothing came up. No reports of attacks, no news of missing hikers. Just the normal stuff: deer, bears, raccoons. Weeks later, I showed the pictures of the footprints to a local wildlife expert. He looked at them and frowned. He said they looked human, but distorted, like something wearing heavy boots, but the shape didn't match any known boot or shoe. And the scratches on the trees, too deep for animal claws, too wild and rough to be from a person casually brushing past. The expert suggested the prints could have been made by someone trying to appear larger, maybe wearing something over their feet, but it didn't add up. I started to wonder if the person or thing was watching people in the forest, waiting for someone alone, vulnerable. The last thing I want to say is this. I went back once, months later, with a group of friends. I wanted to prove to myself it was just my imagination. But when we arrived, the clearing looked different. The fire pit was gone, covered with fresh dirt and leaves. The footprints were replaced by new ones, but they were smaller, lighter. The trees still had deep scratches, but they seemed fresher, newer. We didn't stay long. After that, I never camped alone again. The woods hold secrets. They are not always quiet or peaceful. Sometimes they hide things that watch from the shadows, things that don't show themselves but leave marks you can't explain. I still think about that night, about the scraping sounds just outside my tent, about those huge, strange footprints circling my camp. And I know one thing for sure, I was not alone out there. That is a truth I carry with me every time I hear the wind through the trees, and it keeps me away from the forest after dark. I had been planning this camping trip for months. I needed to get away from everything: work, city noise, traffic, people. I wanted silence, open space, trees that went on forever, and fresh air that didn't smell like car exhaust or fast food. I picked a place deep in the national forest, several hours from the nearest town. It wasn't a popular trail. In fact, the spot I chose didn't even have a name on the official map. I found it through a combination of satellite views and forums where people talked about hidden camping spots with little foot traffic. I packed everything I thought I'd need: tent, food, extra clothes, water filter, first aid kit, a knife, flashlight, extra batteries, bear spray, and a GPS. I also printed out topographic maps just in case the GPS failed. I wasn't new to camping. I'd done it for years, but this time I was going deeper, far from the usual trails. I wanted solitude. I didn't want to hear or see another human being for at least a few days. I parked at a gravel pull-off around noon. There was no other car. The sun was shining, the air was warm but not hot, and the forest looked endless. Thick trees, lots of pines, some old oaks. It was quiet, just birds, insects, the wind. I felt great. I slung my pack over my shoulders and started walking. The trail, if you could even call it that, was faint. There were signs it had been walked, but not often. It followed a stream for a while, winding up through the trees and into higher ground. I walked for about 3 hours, stopping to drink water and rest. I passed no one. After a while, I found a small flat patch of ground near a rocky ledge that overlooked a drop into a valley. The view was stunning. Green as far as I could see, no buildings, no towers, no roads, just forest. I set up my tent, collected some firewood, and got a small fire going before dark. I cooked a meal from one of those freeze-dried pouches, ate, and sat watching the sky turn dark. Stars came out one by one. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you can't get when you know people are nearby. I crawled into my sleeping bag early. The air had cooled. I left the rain flap of the tent open to let the breeze come in through the mesh. The first night went fine. I woke a few times, which is normal for me in the woods. At one point, I heard what sounded like a deer moving through the trees, hoofs snapping twigs. That didn't bother me. I'd heard that 100 times before. I drifted in and out of sleep until the sky started turning light. The second day, I explored a little. I followed the ridge for a while and then dropped down into the valley to fill up my water bottles from the stream. It took a couple hours. I saw a few old animal tracks in the mud near the bank. Deer, maybe something larger, but nothing fresh. No signs of people. Later that day, something started to feel off. I can't explain it clearly. Nothing happened. No noise, no movement. But I kept looking behind me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I chalked it up to nerves. It's easy to spook yourself when you're alone in the woods. Your mind starts making shapes in the trees. Your ears pick up sounds that might not even be there. I tried to shake it off. That night, I built another fire and sat watching it for a long time. The forest was quiet again, but too quiet this time. Not silent, but more like waiting. The usual night sounds were there: bugs, distant owls, but they felt distant, like I was in a pocket of stillness. I didn't like it. When the fire burned low, I crawled into the tent and zipped everything shut this time, even the mesh window. The air was warm, but I didn't want it open. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There wasn't a noise or movement, just something pulling me out of sleep. I lay still, listening. My heart was already beating faster than it should have been. I heard nothing. No footsteps, no twigs, no wind. But the feeling was back, stronger this time. That sense that something was near me. I reached for the flashlight, kept it off, and just lay there, listening. Then I heard it. A single crunch outside the tent. Not close, maybe 20 feet away. I held my breath. Then another. Slow, spaced out, like something walking carefully. It circled. I could feel it moving. The steps were too light for a bear, too heavy for a deer. I stayed like that for an hour, maybe more. The steps would come, then stop. I didn't hear them leave. Eventually, I must have dozed off. In the morning, I checked around the tent. Nothing. No prints, no broken branches. But I know what I heard. I walked out about 30 yards, making a wide circle. Still nothing. I told myself it had to be an animal, but something didn't sit right. That afternoon, I noticed something else. When I went to check the stream again, I saw what looked like a pile of rocks near the edge of the trail. It wasn't there the day before. 5 or 6 stones, stacked. Not big ones, just fist-sized, but carefully placed, balanced. It didn't look natural. It looked deliberate, like something a person would do. But there shouldn't have been anyone else out here. I hadn't seen another soul since I left my truck. I kicked the pile over, uneasy, and went back to camp early. That night, I didn't make a fire. I just ate a cold meal and climbed into the tent before dark. I wanted to be hidden. I wanted no smoke, no light, nothing that could give away my spot. I laid there with my bear spray beside me and the flashlight in my hand. The footsteps came back, this time closer. I heard them approach from behind the tent, slow, soft, like someone in socks walking through leaves. Then a pause, then movement again, to the side. They circled twice, then stopped. I couldn't hear breathing. I couldn't hear anything but my own heart pounding. Then I heard a stick snap, not a small one, something thick, right outside. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't shine the light. I just lay there, frozen. The sound stayed for a long time. Then nothing. I must have passed out eventually from fear or exhaustion. When the sky turned light again, I unzipped the tent slowly and looked around. No one, nothing. But right at the edge of my camp, not 10 feet from the tent, was another rock pile, bigger this time, and a dead squirrel laid across the top of it. Hadn't been chewed on. No blood, just dead, neatly placed. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just threw everything into my pack, stomped out what little fire I had made the night before, and started hiking back toward the truck. I didn't follow the same path exactly. I wanted to take a more direct route, even if it was harder. I used the GPS and aimed straight for where the gravel pull-off should be. Every so often, I'd stop and listen. Once I thought I heard movement behind me. Once I thought I saw a shadow between the trees. But it was all quick. Nothing I could catch or track. I kept walking, faster now, feet starting to ache, pack getting heavier by the hour. I didn't care. I wanted out of those woods. As the sun started to dip lower, I saw something ahead that made me stop. Another rock pile, right in the middle of the clearing I was about to cross. Taller than the last ones, balanced with weird care. And beside it, a small bone. I don't know what from. Maybe a rabbit. Maybe not. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. Someone was out there. Someone had been watching me since day one, following me, leaving things. I didn't stop. I walked wide around it and kept going. I reached my truck just as the light was starting to go. It was untouched. Everything inside just how I'd left it. I threw the pack in the back and didn't even take off my boots. I started the engine and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station 2 hours away. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. It felt crazy to say out loud, but I've thought about it every day since. I know those woods well. I know animals. I know what's normal and what isn't. And that wasn't normal. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hiker. It was someone else. Someone who didn't want me there. Someone who knew I was alone. And someone who never made a sound unless they wanted me to hear them. I haven't gone back since. I don't camp alone anymore. It started as a simple plan. Just me and my dog, Duke, camping in the woods for the weekend. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I'd been feeling suffocated lately. Work piling up, people crowding every inch of my day, and my head always buzzing with things I hadn't done. I needed to get out, so I packed the tent, some gear, enough food, and filled the back of my old truck with supplies. Duke jumped in the passenger seat like he knew something exciting was coming. Duke's a German Shepherd, 5 years old, and sharp as hell. Protective, obedient, quiet. He doesn't bark at nothing. I trusted him more than I trust most people. I'd had him since he was a pup, trained him myself, and he'd been with me through everything. I liked being alone, but with Duke, it didn't feel like being alone. It just felt peaceful. I picked a camping spot about 3 hours from home, deep in a forested area I'd only been to once before. It wasn't an official campsite, no bathrooms, no cabins, no other people. Just a rough trail off an old logging road, the kind where you're not sure if your tires will make it over the rocks. But I made it. The spot was perfect. A small clearing just big enough for a tent, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the sky. A narrow stream ran about 100 feet away, and the only sounds were birds, water, and wind. I set up camp just before sunset. Tent staked, fire pit cleared, food hung high in a bag off a branch, just in case anything big was sniffing around. I laid out Duke's blanket near the fire pit. He circled twice and dropped down with a heavy sigh. I sat by the fire, poking at the flames, feeling the warmth on my face while my back cooled in the night air. The stars started to peek out. No phone signal, no lights, just dark trees all around and the occasional rustle of animals in the brush. That night, I slept hard. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night, feeling cold. I sat up in the tent, still in my sleeping bag. Duke wasn't inside. That wasn't normal. I whistled quietly once, then again. No sound. I unzipped the tent, heart starting to beat faster. It was dark, but the moonlight was strong enough to make out shapes. Trees, the outline of the truck. The fire had burned out. No sign of Duke. I called his name low but firm. Still nothing. Then I saw him, just beyond the fire pit, maybe 20 feet away, standing stiff with his ears forward. He was facing the woods. I followed his gaze. I couldn't see anything, but Duke didn't move. His posture was tense, tail low, alert like he was staring at something that hadn't moved in a long time. I stepped out slowly, whispering his name. He finally glanced at me, then back at the woods, but didn't come. I walked over and laid a hand on his back. His fur was stiff and raised. I crouched beside him and squinted into the darkness. There was nothing. Maybe some small animal, or maybe he caught a scent. I waited a while longer, but nothing happened. Eventually, Duke seemed to settle. His tail relaxed. I gave his back a rub and brought him back into the tent. I zipped it tight, and this time he stayed close. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, things felt normal again. I shook off the weirdness. Dogs have instincts. Maybe he just smelled a raccoon or something. We had breakfast, oatmeal for me, dry food for him, and then I packed a small bag with water and snacks and we went for a walk. There were trails all through the area, but none of them marked. You could walk for hours and not see another person. That's why I liked it. The forest floor was soft with pine needles, the air cool and fresh. Birds chirped above, squirrels rustled in the leaves, and Duke trotted ahead, sniffing everything like it was brand new. About an hour in, Duke froze again. Same posture, low tail, ears up, eyes focused. This time I followed his gaze and actually saw something. It was a dog, not a wild one. It looked like a lab mix, maybe. Dirty yellow coat, too thin, one ear bent. No collar. It was standing still in the middle of the trees about 30 feet away. Its head was low. It didn't wag its tail. It didn't move. It just stood there and stared. Duke didn't growl, but he didn't move either. Just watched it. I tried to take a step forward, maybe to get a better look or to see if it was hurt. But the dog took off into the woods, fast and quiet. Duke tensed like he wanted to chase it, but I held him back. He didn't fight me, but he looked in the direction it ran for a long time after it was gone. We turned around after that. I didn't want Duke getting worked up and chasing something into the forest. When we got back to camp, I felt off. Not scared. Exactly. Just like there was something I was missing. Why would a dog be out here alone? It looked lost. Or dumped. That happens more than people like to admit. Still, I couldn't shake how it just stood there watching. Like it was waiting for something. Later that day, I kept Duke close. I didn't go too far from camp. I kept the fire going longer than I usually would during the day, mostly to make myself feel a little better. I noticed Duke sniffing the air a lot. He'd walk a little ways, circle back, and stare out into the trees. Always quiet, always alert. When night came, I didn't sleep right away. I sat by the fire with Duke next to me. He kept looking in the same direction, northeast, toward the stream. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything either, just the normal night sounds. But Duke was focused. I kept the fire going longer than usual, but eventually I had to turn in. Duke stayed beside me this time. I zipped the tent all the way, pulled my knife from my bag, and kept it under the sleeping bag, just in case. I didn't like how on edge I felt, but I tried to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I heard a sound, not loud, just a low shuffle like something brushing the tent. I froze. My heart started pounding. Duke was already up, silent but tense. His head was near the tent wall, ears turned forward, completely still. I didn't move. I just listened. Another sound, this one a little farther off, like steps in the dry leaves. Slow, spaced out, not rushing, not scared, just walking, circling. I didn't breathe. Duke didn't growl, didn't bark. He just watched. Then it stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, nothing. Then a soft sound, a sniff, right near the zipper. Duke let out the lowest growl I've ever heard from him. Not loud, but deep, from his chest. The kind of sound that made the hair on my arms rise. I reached slowly for the knife. The sniffing stopped. No sound after that. I waited for a long time before I even dared to unzip the tent. When I finally did, there was nothing there. I checked the area with a flashlight. No prints, no fur, no broken branches. I stayed up the rest of the night with Duke sitting beside me. In the morning, I made a decision to pack up. Something wasn't right. Even if it was just a stray dog or some animal creeping around, it wasn't worth the risk. I started loading the truck while Duke stayed near, watching the woods. I kept scanning for the yellow dog, but never saw it again. As I was packing the last bag, I noticed something. Right at the edge of camp, maybe 50 feet away, there was a small pile of bones. Like something had been eaten there. A rabbit or squirrel maybe, but the bones were picked clean. No fur, no smell, just stacked there, neat and quiet. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. Maybe I just hadn't looked closely, but something about it made me uneasy. It felt placed, not like a predator had eaten and left the scraps. It looked like someone had cleaned it up. We left that hour. As we drove down the dirt trail, I checked the rearview mirror more than once. Nothing followed us. Duke sat alert in the passenger seat, eyes forward, ears twitching at every sound. When I got home, I washed everything, the tent, the bags, Duke. I couldn't stop thinking about that yellow dog. How it just watched. How it didn't act like a normal stray. How Duke, who normally chased anything with 4 legs, never barked once. That night at home, Duke stayed by the door. He didn't sleep in his usual spot by the window. He stayed right at the door like he was guarding it. That lasted for a week. I called the ranger station eventually, just to ask if anyone had reported a lost dog or if anything strange had been happening in that area. The guy I talked to just said no, nothing unusual. Said maybe I saw a coyote or a dumped pet. But I knew what I saw, and I know how Duke acted. It's been a few months now. I haven't gone back to that spot. I still go camping, but only in places where other people camp too. Somewhere with sounds other than wind and birds. Somewhere where Duke doesn't freeze up and stare into the trees like he's waiting for something that isn't supposed to be there. I don't know what was out there. I don't think I want to know, but I trust my dog. And whatever he saw, it was enough to change how he acts at night. and it was enough to make me sleep with the lights on for a long time after we got home. Now, the forest was quiet when I arrived. The sun was dipping low behind the tall pines, casting long shadows that stretched over the dirt path leading into the camping spot I had chosen. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine needles, wet earth, and something faintly sharp, like the scent of a coming rain. I carried my backpack, heavy with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food supplies, and a flashlight. Beside me trotted my dog, Max, a big golden retriever with a thick coat and bright eyes that always seemed alert to every little sound. He was calm now, but I knew as soon as we got deeper into the woods, he'd become more restless, his senses picking up things I couldn't hear or see. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Just me and Max, away from the noise and rush of city life. I wanted to camp alone, to reconnect with the wild. The forest was supposed to be peaceful, a place to clear my mind. But from the moment we started setting up the tent, something about the place felt off. The ground where I picked my spot was soft but dry, covered with a thick bed of pine needles. Max sniffed eagerly, circling the area with his tail wagging low, his ears twitching at every crackle of a twig. I unpacked my gear slowly, not wanting to disturb the quiet too much. Setting up the tent took longer than usual. There was a faint, restless energy in the air that made me jump at every rustle in the bushes. As the last bit of daylight faded, I lit a small fire in the pit I had dug. The flames flickered and crackled, casting a warm glow around our campsite. Max lay down close to the fire, his nose twitching, eyes scanning the dark tree line beyond the circle of light. I sat back on a log, pulling out a small pack of jerky for myself and some treats for Max. The dog devoured his with eagerness, then laid his head on his paws, still alert. The woods around us grew darker, denser, and the sounds of the forest began to fill the night. The chirp of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. I felt calm for a while, the kind of calm that comes when you're truly away from everything. But then I noticed Max stiffen, ears pricked forward, eyes locked on something behind the trees. He rose slowly, his body tense, hackles barely visible along his neck. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Then came the noise, a low growl, almost muffled but unmistakable. I tensed too. Max stepped forward cautiously, a deep warning growl rumbling from his chest. Something was out there, just beyond the firelight. I shone my flashlight into the shadows, but the beam hit only the dark silhouettes of trees and bushes. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The growling stopped. Max settled down again but didn't take his eyes off the woods. I tried to ignore the chill running down my spine. Maybe it was just a wild animal passing through, maybe a coyote or a fox, but something didn't sit right with me. Later that night, after I had crawled into the tent, Max stayed just outside, lying down in the dirt. I could hear his faint breathing mixed with the crackle of the dying fire. Sleep was slow to come. Every small noise made me tense, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the distant hoot of an owl. I kept telling myself it was just the forest, nothing more. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound near the edge of the tent. Not the scratch of branches, but something deliberate, close. I froze, heart hammering. Max growled sharply and bolted outside the tent. I scrambled to unzip the door, but the moment I did, Max was gone into the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after him, calling his name in a whisper, not wanting to startle whatever was there. The beam cut through the night, bouncing over bushes and tree trunks. I caught a glimpse of Max's golden fur disappearing near a fallen log. Then I heard him bark sharply, more scared than angry. When I reached the spot, the beam landed on a large shape in the bushes. My heart stopped. It was a wild dog, or maybe a coyote, bigger than I expected, its eyes reflecting the light like glowing coals. It was growling low and moving slowly, circling Max. My dog was tense but standing his ground, hackles raised, teeth bared. I stayed frozen, not wanting to scare the wild animal into attacking. Max barked again, louder this time, trying to push the intruder back. The wild dog snarled, taking a step forward. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground and raised it between us. The wild dog hesitated, eyes flicking between me and Max. Then it turned and vanished into the shadows. Max stayed close to me after that, and I kept the flashlight beam wide and bright as I led him back to the tent. Once inside, I locked the tent zipper tight and wrapped my arms around Max. His body was trembling just slightly, but his breathing steadied after a few minutes. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. I didn't sleep well, always listening for sounds outside. Every time Max stirred, I felt a little safer. When dawn finally broke, casting pale light through the thin tent fabric, I felt relief wash over me. I packed up fast. Max was tired but alert, watching every tree line as we walked out of the forest. Once we reached my car, I locked the doors and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The trip had been supposed to be a peaceful retreat, but the night had shown me how wild and unpredictable the forest really was, and how much I depended on Max to keep me safe. Driving away, I looked in the rearview mirror at the trees disappearing behind us. The memory of those glowing eyes in the dark stayed with me. I knew I'd never forget how close danger had come, and how even a loyal dog could only do so much against the wild. I learned that night that the forest isn't a storybook place. It's alive with dangers, unseen but real, and you're never truly alone out there. But with someone like Max by your side, ready to face whatever comes, there's still hope. The bond between us wasn't just friendship, it was survival. The sun had just slipped behind the distant hills when I finally pulled into the small dirt parking lot by the trailhead. The quiet hum of the engine died as I switched off the truck, leaving the world outside the windshield dark and still. I grabbed my pack, heavy with all the things I thought I would need. A tent, a sleeping bag, food, water, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. The plan was simple: spend a few nights alone in the forest, away from the noise of the city and the distractions of everyday life. A solo camping trip to clear my head. The air was already cooling as I started down the narrow path that wound its way into the thick woods. The ground beneath my boots was soft, carpeted with fallen leaves and pine needles. The trees towered above me, their branches weaving together like a giant, natural roof that blocked out most of the fading light. I felt the tension of the day begin to slip away with every step. The forest was peaceful, alive with the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of a bird settling in for the night. I had hiked for about an hour, picking a spot I thought was perfect for setting up camp. It was a small clearing, surrounded by tall fir trees, with a shallow stream trickling nearby. The ground was flat and dry, ideal for pitching my tent. I laid out the tent and worked through the familiar motions of assembling it, stretching the fabric, inserting the poles, and finally securing it tight to the ground with stakes. As the tent took shape, the forest around me darkened. The sky was now a deep navy blue, the last traces of twilight swallowed by the thick canopy. By the time I crawled inside the tent, the air had turned crisp and chilly. I zipped up the tent door and pulled my sleeping bag close, lighting a small, battery-powered lantern for some warmth and light. I had brought a small camping stove and some instant noodles for dinner. Cooking in the quiet night felt calming. The hiss of the stove and the soft clink of utensils the only sounds apart from the distant stream. After eating, I lay back, staring up through the mesh ceiling at the stars that had started to prick through the gaps in the tree branches. The woods felt immense, ancient, and for a moment, I was alone with the universe. I was used to the outdoors. Growing up in a small town, weekend camping trips were common. But this time felt different. This time, there was a strange weight in the silence. As I tried to relax, I heard it, a snapping of twigs not far from the stream. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, curious and searching for food. The forest was full of life at night, after all. But the sound didn't stop. It came again, slow and deliberate, like footsteps. They moved closer. My heart rate picked up. I switched off the lantern, plunging the tent into darkness except for the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. The rustling came again, This time, it wasn't random. The steps were paced, and there was a sense of purpose in them. I reached for my flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The forest was still, shadows deep and shifting with the gentle breeze. I saw nothing at first, just the faint outline of trees and bushes. Then I noticed a figure, tall, moving slowly along the edge of the clearing. The figure didn't carry anything obvious, but its movements were too smooth, too controlled to be a deer or any animal. It was human. Panic surged through me. I pulled back inside and zipped the tent shut. My mind raced. Why would someone be out here at this hour? The trailhead had been empty when I arrived. There was no phone signal in this part of the forest, so calling for help wasn't an option. I sat still, listening. The footsteps stopped just beyond the tree line, and I heard a faint voice whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. The presence lingered outside my small camp like a shadow. I didn't want to make a sound or show that I was awake. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. I waited until the forest was silent again, but sleep was out of the question. I stayed awake, alert, every sense tuned to the night. Around midnight, the air grew colder, and I decided to build a small fire to keep warm and maybe keep any unwanted visitors at bay. I gathered dry wood and kindling from around the clearing and worked quickly. The crackling flames threw flickering light on the trees and sent sparks swirling into the night sky. The fire was a comfort, a barrier between me and the unknown. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest was too quiet now, the usual night sounds absent. No birds, no insects, just the faint crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. The isolation felt complete. I kept the fire going until it burned low, then snuffed it out carefully. I lay back down in the tent, wrapping myself tight in the sleeping bag. My flashlight and a small pocket knife were close at hand. The hours crawled by in darkness. Suddenly, I heard it again. Soft footsteps on the leaves, much closer this time. They circled the clearing, slow and deliberate. I could hear heavy breathing, too, ragged and low. My heart pounded so loud I was sure the figure outside could hear it. I debated leaving the tent, but the thought of facing whoever or whatever was out there stopped me cold. Instead, I stayed silent, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The footsteps paused near the tent, then retreated slowly. I held my breath until the sounds faded completely. Morning came with a cold gray light filtering through the trees. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, exhausted but determined not to let fear control me. The clearing looked the same as before, peaceful, untouched. But the ground near the edge of the clearing told a different story. There were footprints in the dirt, large, heavy, and definitely human. They circled my camp, stopping near the fire pit and tracing a path around the tent. Whoever had been there had been close enough to touch my gear. My stomach churned as I studied the prints. They looked fresh. I packed up quickly, not wanting to stay another night. The forest, which had felt like a place of calm, had become something else entirely. I kept my eyes open as I retraced my steps back to the truck, every sound making me jump. When I finally reached the parking lot, the relief was overwhelming. I locked the doors and sat behind the wheel for a long time, gathering myself before driving away. I never saw the figure again, and I never found out who it was or what they wanted. But I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're real people, and sometimes they come close enough to remind you how small and vulnerable you really are out there, alone in the dark. I had planned the camping trip for over a month. I needed to get away. Life in the city had started to feel like I was stuck in a box. Loud streets, screens everywhere, sirens at night, neighbors arguing through thin walls. I missed the quiet. I missed the sound of wind through the trees, the crunch of dry leaves under boots, the smell of pine and smoke. I needed to disappear for a while, just me and nature. I picked a remote spot deep in the woods of northern Montana. I had been there once before, years ago, with my cousin and uncle. They were hunters, I remembered it being peaceful. Dense trees, a slow creek, no cell service, no other people. That's exactly what I was looking for. I packed light but smart tent, sleeping bag, small stove, freeze-dried food, water purifier, flashlight, batteries, knife, rope, bear spray, and a GPS. I also brought a weatherproof journal. I liked writing things down when I was out in the wild. It helped me clear my mind. I also brought my dog, Buck, a 3-year-old German Shepherd. He was well-trained, strong, quiet, and had better instincts than I ever would. I trusted him more than most people. The drive took nearly 6 hours, and the last hour was nothing but gravel and dirt. The final stretch I had to hike on foot, following a faded trail that barely existed anymore. The trees grew close together there, and the underbrush was thick. I had to push branches out of the way, sometimes using my knife just to make space to walk. Buck stayed close to me, his ears up, eyes scanning. By the time I reached the spot I'd marked on my GPS, it was late afternoon. I picked a clearing near a slope, a good distance from the creek but close enough for water. I set up camp. Tent staked, food strung up in a bag high between 2 trees, fire pit cleared. Everything was in place. I cooked a quick dinner, fed Buck, and we sat by the fire as the sun dropped below the trees. The temperature fell fast. That first night was quiet. I didn't hear anything but the fire crackling and the occasional owl. Buck was relaxed, laying by my side. I felt safe. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up early. The forest was cold and damp. There was a light fog. Buck was already up, sniffing around the edges of the camp, his body calm. I made coffee, boiled some oats, then went exploring with Buck on a long leash. We followed the creek upstream. It twisted through thick woods, carving its way past old rocks and fallen trees. We didn't see any other people. No footprints, no wrappers, no old fire pits. Just tracks, deer mostly, some raccoon. Normal stuff. That's how I liked it. That second night, something changed. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up. Buck was growling. Low, deep, not loud. Just a steady, low sound that I could feel in my chest. I sat up in the sleeping bag and held my breath. The fire had died to nothing but a faint orange glow. I couldn't see anything through the tent walls. I unzipped the tent slowly and looked out. Buck was standing still, head lowered, eyes locked on the trees just past the edge of camp. His fur was bristling. I followed his stare but saw nothing. The forest was black, still quiet, too quiet, not even wind. I stayed still for almost 20 minutes. My hand was wrapped around the bear spray. Buck didn't move an inch. Whatever it was, it had been out there and Buck knew it. But eventually, he relaxed. I tossed a few small logs on the fire and watched them catch. We both sat there for a while before going back into the tent. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I noticed something strange. I went to check the food bag I had strung up. It was torn down. The rope had been snapped. Not chewed, but snapped. The bag was ripped open, the contents scattered. Some were missing. Some were just torn and left behind. I checked for tracks. The dirt was messy, dug up, but I saw at least one large paw print. Larger than a dog's, way larger. I measured it against my boot. It was longer and wider. Definitely a predator. I thought maybe a bear. But bears usually claw and chew through bags. They don't snap ropes clean like that. And they usually leave claw marks. There were none. I packed up what I could and moved camp about half a mile further upstream, closer to a rocky area that would make it harder for an animal to sneak up. I didn't eat much that night. I boiled water, ate some cold food, and kept the fire high. Buck was uneasy. He kept pacing. His ears kept turning like he was picking up sounds I couldn't hear. I stayed up most of the night with my back to a tree, flashlight in one hand, bear spray in the other. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Something big moving through the trees. Not running, not stomping, but moving with purpose. Twigs breaking, leaves crunching. Then it stopped. Buck stood and stared, growling. I aimed the flashlight. Nothing. I scanned the trees. Still nothing. I thought I was just tired, paranoid. The forest can play tricks on your ears in the dark. But then I heard a heavy exhale. like a sharp breath, deep, close, just beyond the edge of the firelight. I stood still. The hairs on my neck stood up. Buck growled louder, and then it moved, fast. I heard it break into a run, crashing through the trees, and vanish into the night. It wasn't coming toward us. It was moving away, but it had been close, very close. The first light, I packed up again. I thought about heading back, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe pride, maybe stupidity. I thought maybe whatever it was had just been passing through. Maybe it wouldn't come back. I moved camp again, this time to higher ground on a flat shelf of rock above the creek. Fewer trees, better visibility, harder access for anything big. I was running low on food, but I had enough to last another night or two. That night, I built a large fire and placed sharpened sticks in a circle around the tent, just like I'd seen in old survival books. It looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I kept Buck inside the tent with me, zipped up. No chances. I stayed up until almost 4 a.m., flashlight in hand. The woods stayed silent. Too silent. No wind, no owls, no frogs. Just nothing. I must have dozed off just after 4. When I woke up, it was still dark, but something was wrong. Buck was growling again, but this time it was different. Faster, more intense. I unzipped the tent slowly. The fire had died down to low embers. There was something standing just past the fire ring. It was hard to see clearly, but I could make out the shape. It was big, too big to be a deer, too long to be a bear. It looked like a wolf, but way bigger, almost the size of a small horse. Its eyes caught the faint light and reflected back yellow. It didn't move like a dog. It stood still like it was studying us, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Buck was growling so loud now it felt like a warning, like he was telling it to back off, but it didn't. Then Buck lunged. He ripped through the tent flap and charged at it. I yelled, but it was too late. I grabbed the flashlight and ran after him. By the time I got to the fire ring, they were gone. The woods exploded with sound. Snarling, crashing, yelping, then silence, then another loud crash, then nothing. I screamed Buck's name, but I knew he wouldn't come back. I followed the sounds, crashing through trees, scraping my legs, flashlight bouncing wildly. I saw broken branches, fur on the bark, blood. Then I saw Buck. He was lying on his side near the base of a tree, still breathing but badly hurt. Deep gashes down his side, leg bent wrong. I carried him back to camp. Took me almost an hour. I spent the rest of the night tending to him, cleaning his wounds, wrapping them. I cried more than I had in years. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed everything and left. Buck couldn't walk, so I made a stretcher from branches and tied it with rope, dragging him behind me. I followed the GPS, moving slow. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop for anything. It took us nearly 8 hours to get back to the truck. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. I drove straight to the nearest vet hospital. Buck was in surgery for hours. They saved him. He still walks with a limp now, but he made it. I never went back to that part of the woods again. I don't think I ever will. I still don't know what that animal was. Some kind of giant wolf? A freak mutation? An escaped hybrid? Something people don't talk about? I've done the research. I've read about oversized wolves in the wild, some growing bigger than anyone thought possible. Maybe it was one of those. Maybe it was something else. Whatever it was, it wasn't scared of me. Came close, watched, waited. It wanted something. Maybe food. Maybe more. That trip changed something in me. I still camp, but I never go deep alone anymore. I keep to the trails, the parks, the places with rangers and rules. And I never forget. The sun was just slipping behind the hills when I arrived at the small clearing deep in the forest where I planned to camp. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Just me, my backpack, and the wilderness. No cell service, no distractions, no one around for miles. I wanted to escape the noise of the city and find some peace in nature. I wasn't expecting anything scary, just a quiet night under the stars. The forest was thick with tall pines and oaks, their branches creaking gently in the evening breeze. The ground was soft with fallen needles and leaves. I picked a spot that looked flat and dry, near a small stream that babbled quietly nearby. The smell of pine mixed with damp earth filled the air. I set down my pack and began to unpack my gear. Tent, sleeping bag, stove, food. The light was fading fast, turning everything around me into deep shadows. I started setting up my tent carefully, making sure it was secure. The ground was uneven in places, but I found some decent soil to hammer the stakes in. The sounds of the forest were calming, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the call of a distant owl, the occasional snap of a twig. I worked efficiently, knowing the night would get cold and dark soon. The wind was picking up, making the branches sway more. I felt a chill and zipped up my jacket tighter. Once my tent was ready, I collected some dry wood for a fire. I was careful to gather sticks that were brittle and dry, and soon had a small pile. I used a lighter to start the fire, blowing gently on the kindling until the flames caught and grew. The fire crackled and sent up sparks into the dark sky. I felt a little warmer now and sat back to enjoy the light and heat. I cooked some simple food, canned beans and a piece of bread, and ate slowly, savoring the quiet around me. The stars were starting to appear above the tree line, scattered like tiny diamonds on black velvet. I leaned back against a log, watching the flames dance. For a moment, I felt completely at ease. As the fire died down, I put the food away and decided to take a short walk along the stream. The moon was just rising, casting a pale light through the branches. The air was cooler now, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. The forest seemed peaceful, but there was something else. The faint feeling that I wasn't alone. It was subtle, like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, but I shook it off. It was probably just my imagination. The stream gurgled quietly as I walked along its edge. I noticed some footprints in the soft mud. They looked fresh, too fresh. I couldn't tell what made them exactly, but they were large with deep impressions. Maybe a deer or a wild boar. Still, it made me a bit uneasy. I decided to head back to camp quickly. When I returned, the fire was just a small pile of glowing embers. I added some more wood to keep it burning through the night. As I sat near the fire, I thought I heard something moving in the trees. Not the small animals I had heard before, but something bigger. My heart started beating a little faster. The forest noises seemed louder now. The crunch of leaves, the snap of branches, the occasional heavy breath. I reminded myself that wild animals lived here, and they usually avoid people. Still, I kept my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move between the trees. It was quick, and I couldn't make out what it was. I tightened my grip on the small hunting knife I always carried for safety. The shadow vanished. I tried to calm myself down and decided to get into the tent and rest. I unzipped the tent door, crawled inside, and zipped it shut behind me. The mesh window let in some moonlight, casting a pale glow inside. I laid down on my sleeping mat, pulling the sleeping bag over me. I stared up at the tent ceiling, listening to the sounds outside. Minutes passed. Then, a low noise came from outside, something like a growl, but muffled. I froze. It was too close. I held my breath and strained my ears. The sound stopped. After a long moment, I decided to peek out. I unzipped the tent slightly and looked through the mesh. Nothing but dark trees. The fire was nearly out. Then I saw it. Eyes. Two bright yellow eyes staring straight at me from the edge of the firelight. I froze. The eyes blinked slowly and disappeared behind a tree. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pulled the zipper up quickly and sat back against the tent wall. I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't about to find out. I grabbed my phone, no signal of course, but I switched on the flashlight app and shined it toward where I'd seen the eyes. The light caught a large animal, a bear, its fur dark and shiny, standing just beyond the firelight. It was looking right at me, calm but powerful. I stayed very still. The bear didn't move for a long time. Then it turned and padded quietly away into the woods. I felt a mix of relief and fear. I was lucky it hadn't charged or come closer. I thought about all the safety advice I had read about camping in bear country. I should have hung my food in a tree, made more noise while walking. I hadn't taken the precautions seriously enough. For the rest of the night, I stayed inside the tent, listening to every sound. Every rustle made me jump. When the sun finally began to rise, casting soft orange light through the trees, I unzipped the tent carefully and stepped outside. The forest looked peaceful again, but the footprints were still there, large and fresh. I packed up quickly, not wanting to stay any longer. I kept looking over my shoulder as I made my way back toward the trail. My legs were tired, but I moved fast. When I reached my car, I felt a huge wave of relief. That night had reminded me how wild and unpredictable nature really is. It wasn't about ghosts or fairy tales. It was about real animals, real danger, and respecting the wilderness. I had been careless, and that had almost cost me. But I was alive, and I had learned something important. In the woods, you are never truly alone, and sometimes the most frightening things are the ones you can't see clearly. I promised myself I'd be better prepared next time. More respect, more caution, because out there in the dark, things can get real fast, and not everyone comes back to tell the story. It was late July when I decided to take a solo camping trip. I'd been working long hours in the city, barely sleeping, barely breathing fresh air. I just wanted quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes with earbuds or white noise machines, but the real kind, where the only thing you hear is the wind, bugs, and maybe your own heartbeat if you listen hard enough. I didn't want to go to a crowded park or some manicured campsite filled with tourists and RVs. I wanted something raw and open. A friend from work told me about an old farm a few hours outside the city, near a town that barely had a name. It wasn't in use anymore, hadn't been for decades, but the land was still there. Some fences, an old barn, and open fields as far as the eye could see. He said his uncle used to own it, and it was quiet, completely isolated. The house had collapsed years ago, but the barn still stood. Sounded perfect. I packed light, just my tent, sleeping bag, basic food, water, first aid kit, flashlight, my old hunting knife, and a few other essentials. I didn't bring a gun. I didn't think I'd need one. That decision still crawls around in the back of my head sometimes. I reached the farm in the late afternoon. The road leading to it was a mix of cracked pavement and dirt, lined with weeds that brushed against the sides of my car. I parked near a broken fence line and stepped out. It was hot, the kind of dry, sticky heat that makes your shirt cling to your back. A few bees floated by. Grasshoppers kicked up from the weeds with every step I took. I looked out across the land. Endless fields of tall grass and small hills. The barn stood crooked in the distance. Dark red paint faded to pink in places, the roof sagging slightly in the middle. There was no one for miles. No cell signal either, but that's what I wanted. I set up my tent under a large tree near the barn. The shade helped a little with the heat, and the ground there was flat. I spent the next hour walking around the property. Most of the fences had fallen or were buried under tall grass. I found the collapsed house on the other side of the field. Just a pile of splintered wood, bricks, and rusted nails. A few broken window frames still stood like crooked skeletons. I didn't go poking around. There were snakes and nails and things better left alone. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned gold and then purple. Crickets came alive. Fireflies blinked around the field. I sat by a small fire I built near my tent, heating a can of soup, listening to the hum of the night. Felt good. For a while, it was everything I'd hoped for. That changed around midnight. I woke up to a sound. Not loud, not sharp. Just something. The thud, maybe. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I dreamed it. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart thumping. My tent was still, the air inside heavy and warm. I unzipped it slowly and peeked out. The fire was out. The barn loomed in the dark just a short walk away, its edges glowing faintly under the moonlight. I waited. Nothing. Just crickets and wind. I almost went back to sleep. Almost. Then I heard it again. Louder this time. A heavy, slow drag, like something scraping along wood, came from the barn. I should have stayed in the tent. I should have waited until morning. But instead, I grabbed my flashlight and slipped on my boots. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. Maybe it was an old door swinging in the wind. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe nothing. The air outside was still. The kind of stillness that makes every step you take feel loud. I walked slowly toward the barn, flashlight off at first. I didn't want to blind myself in case I needed to see shadows or movement. As I got closer, the smell hit me thick, sour, like wet hay and something else. Rot maybe. I turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up the side of the barn. The big sliding doors were cracked open just enough for someone or something to slip through. I stopped a few feet away. My heart thudded in my ears. The air felt heavier near the barn, like something was waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, just listening. I could hear movement, slow, irregular movement, wood creaking, something heavy shifting, something alive. I backed away. I didn't want to go inside. I told myself I'd check it in the morning, that maybe an animal got in. I turned and started walking back toward the tent. That's when I heard the sound again. This time it was behind me, in the grass, close. I spun around with the flashlight. Nothing, just grass swaying. I walked faster, then jogged. My flashlight caught something in the grass to my left, a quick flash of movement. I froze. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. Not deer big, bigger. I didn't run, not yet, but I kept moving, slower, trying not to make noise. I made it back to the tent and grabbed my knife. I didn't go back inside. I sat with my back against the tree, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, trying to control my breathing. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The sun finally rose. The fear didn't go away, but it dulled a little. I packed up fast, threw everything into the car, barely folding the tent. I didn't even bother checking the barn again. But before I drove off, I walked toward the tree where I'd sat all night. I noticed the grass nearby was flattened, not trampled, dragged, like something heavy had been pulled across it in the dark. There were marks too, deep, uneven gouges in the dirt. Not tire tracks, not footprints, just deep, rough scrapes. I couldn't make sense of it. I drove back to the city that morning trying to forget it, but I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Something was out there, something watching, something not afraid of me. A few weeks passed. Couldn't sleep. I'd wake up thinking I heard dragging outside my window. Every creak in my apartment made my skin crawl. I stopped telling myself it was just an animal, because animals don't watch you all night without making a sound. They don't leave marks like that. They don't follow you back. But what scared me more, what truly made my stomach knot, was when I got a call from that same friend who told me about the farm. He sounded shaken. He said he just found out his uncle hadn't owned the farm in years. In fact, he said the land had been sold off a long time ago to someone no one really knew. The name on the deed wasn't familiar to anyone in the town nearby. And worse, 2 hikers had gone missing out there the year before. Their car had been found near the same fence where I parked mine. But there was no trace of them. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just an old campsite near the barn. And their gear, torn, scattered, like someone had tried to leave in a hurry. He told me not to go back. I didn't need convincing. Since then, I've never gone camping alone again. I still think about those nights sometimes. The dragging sound, the marks in the dirt, the way the air felt heavy, like it wasn't just me breathing it. And sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, I think I hear something. Something behind me, something slow, something that waits, but I never turn around. It was August, the kind of thick, hot August that clings to your skin. The air doesn't move and even the bugs seem slower. I had a few days off work and I wanted to be alone, away from the constant buzz of city life. Phones, sirens, traffic, voices. Everything had started to feel too loud. I needed silence. So I packed up my gear and drove about 4 hours out to a remote area in the mountains where there's a long, winding river that cuts through a deep pine forest. I'd found this spot last year during a hiking trip. It was off-trail and hidden, but if you knew how to follow the tree markings and keep the sun at your left during the walk-in, you could find it. It was flat, close to the river, with soft dirt and just enough tree coverage for shade. Nobody went there. I arrived just before sunset, parked at the trailhead, slung on my pack, and made the hike in, maybe an hour through thick forest. The deeper I went, the quieter everything got. It always hits me in those moments how loud silence really is. You notice the little things. The crunch of your boots, the occasional snap of a branch behind you, the dry sound of wind pushing through tall pine needles. It's peaceful, but something about it also makes you a little paranoid. You're far from help. If something goes wrong, nobody's coming. I reached the spot and dropped my gear, set up my tent facing the river, rolled out my sleeping bag, then walked down to the water to wash my face. The current was slow and the surface looked like black glass. I sat for a long time just breathing. I didn't check my phone. I didn't even bring a book. I wanted to do nothing. I made a small fire, ate some dry food and jerky, then laid back on my sleeping mat, watching the stars come out. Everything was fine that first night, but then I started hearing something. At first, I thought it was just the river or an animal. You always hear things in the woods. Sticks snapping, distant howls, owls, raccoons digging around, bugs clicking. But this was different. It was just before dawn, that weird gray hour where you're half asleep but every sound is sharp. I heard what sounded like wet footsteps near the river. Not splashes, not animals running through water. It sounded like someone walking barefoot through the shallow edge of the river. One step, then another, and then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't sit up. I just laid there, heart pounding, ears straining. Then I heard it again, closer this time. One step, then another. Slow, like someone testing the ground. It stopped again. Then a splash, like a misstep or someone kicking a rock by accident. It made my heart stop. I waited until it was fully light before I unzipped the tent and looked around. Nothing. Just trees, the river, the fire pit. No footprints. No broken branches. I walked up and down the riverbank, looking for anything. Mud, disturbed grass, anything that showed someone had been there. Nothing. I told myself it was probably just my head messing with me. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. Maybe a deer walked through the shallow edge of the river and I'd imagined it sounded like human steps. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. Later that morning, I thought about packing up and leaving. But I didn't want to be that person who ran from shadows. So I stayed. I forced myself to go through the day like normal. Fished a little, sat in the sun, explored the area around camp. There were no signs of anyone. No wrappers, no boot prints, no broken branches like a person would leave. The forest looked untouched. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I didn't drink or do anything that would dull my senses. I laid in the tent, eyes open, listening. It was dead silent. Not even crickets. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. A single step in the water. Then silence. Then another step. And then nothing. It always came in pairs. Step, step, stop. I gripped my flashlight but didn't turn it on. I didn't want to make any noise. I stayed still, trying to calm my breathing. Then I heard something new. Breathing. Not mine. Something else. Slow, steady, human. Like someone was standing just beyond the tent. I could feel it. I could almost time the rhythm of it. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. I sat up slowly, careful not to make the sleeping mat rustle. I turned on my flashlight in one quick motion and unzipped the tent. Nothing. The woods were still. The fire had burned out. The river was quiet. I stood up and shined the light in every direction. Checked the trees. Walked down to the river. I must have stood there for 15 minutes. Light swinging back and forth across the water and the trees behind me. Still nothing. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my back to the tent, flashlight in one hand, a small camp axe in the other. I told myself again, maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was my own breathing echoing strangely in the silence. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew what human breathing sounded like. The next morning, I made a decision. I'd leave after breakfast. But first I wanted to walk upstream, maybe a mile or so, and see if there were signs of another camp. Maybe someone was messing with me. A prank. I needed to know, so I followed the river north. It got thicker with trees and brush, harder to walk. Eventually, I found a small clearing. Not a camp, just a little open space with grass flattened in a strange way, like someone had laid down there recently. Next to it was something that made my stomach turn. A shirt, soaked, stained, ripped down the front like it had been caught on something. And next to it, a sock, also wet and dirty, like it had been there a while. I looked around for more, but that was it. No shoes, no tent, no backpack, no fire pit. Just those two things, and a heavy silence that made my ears ring. I didn't touch anything. I backed out of there and walked fast back to camp. I threw everything in my pack in less than 10 minutes. Rolled up the tent half dirty, didn't care. I needed to go. That's when I realized something else. My boots were wet, not just damp from dew. Soaked. The insides were squishy like they'd been submerged, but I'd left them inside the tent, and the tent flap had been zipped. I hadn't gone near the water in over 12 hours. There was no way. I didn't stop to think about it. I put them on anyway. Every step squelched and sucked, and it made my stomach twist. I hiked out fast, barely looking at the trail, just following instinct and the sun. Every sound in the woods now sounded wrong. Every bird call made me flinch. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I'd see someone just behind a tree, but there was nothing. When I got to my truck, I unlocked it, threw my gear in the back, and got in. I locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking, and then I saw it. On the hood of the truck, 2 wet footprints, bare feet, 1 step, then another. That was it. They were gone in minutes under the sun. But I saw them. That night I drove straight home. Didn't stop, didn't eat, just drove until the sky changed from gold to black. I didn't tell anyone. What was I going to say? That I ran from a ghost? Except I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't. The next week I checked news reports. I wanted to know if someone had gone missing in those woods. A hiker, camper, a body, but nothing came up. No alerts, no names, no investigations. Just clean silence. I tried to forget it. I went back to work. I told myself it was just a bad trip. But I knew better. Months passed. Then winter came. I got a call one night from a number I didn't know. It was a local ranger's office near that area. They asked if I'd been out there in late August. I said yeah. I asked why. They told me a hunter found something upstream from where I camped. A skeleton, mostly buried in silt and brush. Judging by what was left of the clothing and the decay, it had been there maybe a year. No ID, just a shirt and 1 sock. They asked if I'd seen anything strange. I told them no. I don't camp alone anymore. I still hike, still love the woods, but I go with friends. I bring more gear. I bring cameras. I never go back to that river. And sometimes, when I wake up just before dawn, I swear I hear it again in my head. Step, step, stop. The sun was starting to set when I pulled into the small clearing deep in the woods. The sky was painted with colors, reds, oranges, and fading blues that meant the night was just about to arrive. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. Just me, my dog, and the quiet of the forest. No distractions, no people. I wanted to get away from everything for a while, and I knew my dog, Max, needed the fresh air and space to run. Max was a big German shepherd, lean and strong. He had thick fur and sharp eyes that never missed a thing. He was always alert, always watching. I loved having him with me. He wasn't just a pet. He was a companion, a protector. I knew I could trust him out here. I parked the car and grabbed the gear from the back seat. The air smelled like pine and earth, clean and fresh. I set up the tent near a small stream where the water made soft sounds as it moved over the rocks. Max circled around, sniffing everything, tail wagging but cautious. He stayed close to me, like he was already sensing something. The first night was peaceful. I made a fire, cooked some food, and watched the stars come out. Max lay beside me, his head on his paws, eyes half closed but still alert. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, the occasional hoot of an owl. But none of it felt threatening, felt natural. The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the woods. Max and I followed a narrow trail that twisted between tall trees and thick bushes. The sun filtered through the leaves, making patterns on the ground. I took my time, listening to the sounds and watching Max move ahead, nose to the ground. Around midday, we reached a small clearing. The grass was tall and wildflowers grew in patches. Max suddenly stopped and stood still, ears pricked forward. He stared at something in the distance. I looked where he was looking but saw nothing unusual, just trees and underbrush. But Max wouldn't move. He growled softly, a low, warning sound that made my skin crawl. I tried to call him, but he stayed rooted. Then I noticed fresh tracks on the ground, big and deep. They didn't look like deer or bear prints. They were bigger, more human. My heart started to beat faster. I had heard stories about this part of the forest. People who disappeared. Strange noises. Things that didn't make sense. I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was just hunters or other campers. Still, I decided it was best to head back. On the way, Max kept looking behind us, ears flat, growling occasionally. I tried to keep calm, but every crack of a twig made me jump. By the time we got back to the tent, the sky was already dimming. I quickly lit the fire again, feeling uneasy. That night, something changed. The usual forest sounds were quieter, as if the woods were holding their breath. Max paced around the campfire, alert and tense. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound from the edge of the trees. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Something moving slowly through the brush. Max growled louder, standing with his hackles raised. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it toward the sound. For a moment, I saw a dark shape moving between the trees. It was too big to be an animal, but too quiet to be a person walking normally. My pulse quickened. I called Max to me and held him close. The fire was dying down, and the night was closing in. I didn't want to run, but I knew I couldn't stay still either. I kept my eyes on the dark edge of the forest, waiting. Hours passed. The dragging noise came again, slower this time. Max barked sharply, running toward the sound, then stopped. I could hear him growling low. Then suddenly a loud crash from the trees. Something big had fallen or been thrown. I grabbed my backpack, packed the essentials, and told myself to stay calm. Max stayed by my side, ready to move. The thought of being out here, alone except for my dog, with something unknown watching us, was terrifying. I decided to leave at first light. There was no way I could stay another night in that place. But sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jump, and Max wouldn't settle either. When dawn finally came, I packed up quickly. Max was restless but stayed close. As we walked back toward the car, I noticed broken branches and footprints in the soft earth. Human footprints, too big for any man I knew, and deep, as if the person was carrying something heavy. I kept glancing behind me, but there was nothing visible. Still, the feeling of being followed didn't go away. Once I reached the car, I locked the doors and started the engine. Max jumped inside, panting but alert. I looked back one last time before driving away. The forest looked calm, almost peaceful in the morning light. But I knew better. That trip stayed with me. I couldn't explain what was out there. Some people might say it was wild animals or hunters, but I don't think so. Whatever it was watching, waiting. Max never stopped being alert after that night. He was different, more watchful, more tense. And I learned something important. The forest holds secrets that aren't always meant to be found, and some things are better left alone. The night I went camping alone is one I'll never forget. I didn't plan on anything strange happening. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a way to clear my head, get away from the city noise, and enjoy some peace under the stars. But what happened instead was far from peaceful, and the memory still sits heavy in my mind. I had picked a spot deep in the woods, somewhere off a little dirt road I found on a map. The forest there was thick with tall pine trees, and the ground was soft with fallen leaves and pine needles. I'd never been to this exact place before, but it looked quiet and untouched, perfect for a solo camping trip. I arrived in the late afternoon, carrying my backpack and gear. I set up my tent near a small clearing surrounded by trees. The sun was still warm, but I could feel the cool air settling in. The quiet was what hit me first. No cars, no people, just the sounds of the forest. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, and the distant sound of a stream flowing somewhere nearby. After setting up, I gathered firewood and built a small campfire. I cooked some canned beans and ate slowly, enjoying the calm. I watched the sun sink lower, the sky turning shades of orange and pink before fading to dark blue. As the last light disappeared, I felt a chill run through the air. I put on a jacket and sat close to the fire, feeling the heat on my face. That's when I first noticed something strange. A faint noise, like footsteps on dry leaves, coming from just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon moving quietly. But the sound didn't stop. It was slow, deliberate, and steady, like someone walking carefully but with purpose. I stayed still, listening. The fire crackled softly, and the smell of smoke mixed with pine filled the air. The footsteps moved closer, but I couldn't see anything through the dark shadows of the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it towards the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. No movement, no shape, just empty trees and leaves. I told myself it was probably an animal trying to sneak by. Still, I felt uneasy. I put the flashlight down and tried to focus on the fire, telling myself to relax. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled around the clearing, slow and methodical. I didn't hear a voice or a crack of a branch breaking under heavy steps, just soft, steady footfalls. The night grew colder, and the fire died down to glowing embers. I added more wood to keep it alive, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The footsteps moved closer, now sounding like they were almost at the edge of the clearing. I picked up a long stick from nearby, holding it like a weapon, even though I didn't expect to use it. Suddenly, a small animal, a raccoon or something, burst out of the bushes and ran across the clearing. I felt a moment of relief, thinking the noise was just wildlife. But then I noticed something else. A faint shape just behind where the animal had been, too large to be a normal animal, and moving just at the edge of the firelight. My heart raced. I tried to shine my flashlight again in that direction, but the beam flickered and died. I cursed under my breath, shaking the flashlight, trying to get it to work. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started again, this time heavier and slower, as if whoever or whatever was out there had noticed my light. I realized I had to be ready for anything. The stick felt heavier in my hands. I slowly moved towards the tent, thinking maybe I should get inside and wait for daylight. As I stepped back, I felt a soft snap of a twig behind me. I froze. The footsteps were right there. I spun around, raising the stick, but still saw nothing. The dark was thick, and the forest swallowed every shape and sound. I took a deep breath and decided I couldn't stay outside. I ran to my tent, pulled the zipper closed, and sat down inside, my heart pounding in my ears. Inside the tent, it was cramped and smelled like canvas and pine needles. I tried to calm myself by breathing slowly, telling myself the woods were full of sounds and shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me. The fire had almost died out, so I grabbed a small flashlight from my bag and turned it on. I shone it outside the tent flap, scanning the edge of the clearing. Nothing moved. The forest was still and silent except for the rustling of the wind in the trees. I decided I needed to keep the fire alive. I zipped open the tent a little and threw some small branches onto the last glowing embers. The fire caught, growing brighter, pushing back the dark a little. I stayed by it, eyes wide open, gripping my stick. Then I heard something else. This time, a low growl from the trees, deep and guttural. It wasn't like any animal growl I'd heard before. It sent a cold shiver down my spine. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst out of my chest. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a bear or a big animal angry because of the fire, but I didn't see any sign of it. No rustling bushes, no glowing eyes reflecting the light. The growling stopped after a minute, but the footsteps began again, slower, heavier, circling around my camp. I stayed frozen, listening to the crunch of leaves and twigs. Every sound made me jump, every shadow made me tense. Hours passed like this. I didn't dare sleep. I kept my stick close and the fire burning. At one point, I heard branches breaking, and then silence again. I could tell the presence outside wasn't human. No voice, no yelling, no other sounds except the soft footsteps and occasional growl. At dawn, the first light seeped through the trees. The forest seemed to breathe a little easier. I waited until the sun rose higher before daring to unzip my tent. The fire was just ashes now, but no footprints or signs of anyone near the camp. The ground was undisturbed except for my own tracks from earlier. I packed up quickly, still feeling uneasy, and started walking back to my car. The woods seemed normal in daylight, birds flying, the breeze moving leaves. But I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling the eyes that had watched me disappear with the night. When I got home, I checked the area on a map and online forums. I learned that in that forest, some people used it for hunting or sometimes illegal activity, but it was mostly empty. Maybe the footsteps were someone passing by, but I had seen nothing that suggested a human presence. The heavy growl didn't match any normal animal sound in the area either. I never went back there again. The feeling of being hunted in those woods was real. No ghosts or monsters, just something living in the dark, something cautious and possibly dangerous. The next time I camp, I'll stick to places where I'm not alone, where the sounds of the forest don't feel like they belong to something watching me. Because that night, in the silence and shadows, I realized how alone you can really be, and how something out there can make you feel like prey without ever showing itself. It was the kind of summer night that felt endless, thick with heat and silence. The sun had dropped low hours ago, but the air still hung heavy, pressed down by the weight of a day that refused to cool. I had planned this camping trip alone for weeks. I wanted to get away from everything. No phone, no people, no noise except what nature offered. I thought I was prepared, but what I didn't expect was how quickly that quiet would turn into something sharp and uncomfortable. Something that dug into my nerves and wouldn't let go. I arrived at the site just before dusk. It was a small clearing deep in a national forest, far off the main roads, a place I found on an old map tucked inside a guidebook. The spot looked perfect, flat ground, surrounded by thick trees, with a small stream running nearby. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing, just far enough from the water to avoid any bugs but close enough to hear the soft rush of the stream. I laid out my sleeping bag, unpacked my gear, and stacked a pile of firewood that I'd gathered nearby. The forest was quiet except for the occasional chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves. As I struck the match and lit the fire, the orange flames flickered to life, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted in the dark. The firelight felt like a barrier, a small island of safety surrounded by the black shapes of trees and underbrush. I sat close to the fire, warming my hands and staring into the flames as they danced. The sky overhead was a deep navy, studded with countless stars. The Milky Way stretched across it, bright and clear. It was one of those nights that felt perfect for being alone with your thoughts, where the usual noise of the world fades, and all you can hear is yourself breathing. After eating a simple meal I packed, a couple of energy bars and some nuts, I cleaned up and prepared for bed. I double-checked my gear, secured the tent flap, and crawled inside the small shelter. The fabric walls of the tent muffled the sounds outside, but not enough to block them entirely. I could still hear the steady sound of the stream and the occasional snap of twigs. I lay awake for a while, staring at the thin nylon ceiling, listening. Then, something moved just outside the tent. A small crackling noise, like a branch breaking underfoot. My heart jumped. I froze, trying to tell if it was an animal or something else. The noise stopped, then started again, closer this time. It was faint but steady, like footsteps moving slowly, quietly, just beyond the fire's reach. I tried to tell myself it was probably a deer or some other small animal. The forest was full of wildlife, after all. But the sound was different, too deliberate, too paced. Not a random scurry or rustle, but slow, careful steps. The fire was dying down now, and I felt cold despite the warmth from earlier. I wanted to get up, grab my flashlight, maybe look outside, but fear held me still. The steps stopped right at the edge of the clearing, where the trees grew thickest. The darkness there was complete, a solid black wall beyond the firelight. I whispered to myself that everything was fine, that I was imagining things, but the next sound made my blood run cold. A low growl, deep and rough, came from just beyond the clearing. It wasn't the kind of growl I'd heard from forest animals before. It was harsher, filled with warning, maybe even anger. I gripped my small pocket knife, the only tool I had besides the flashlight in my backpack. I felt completely exposed. The tent's thin walls, no protection against whatever was out there. The growling continued, slowly moving around the edge of the clearing, circling. I remembered reading about wildlife behavior. Bears, wolves, both can be dangerous, but they usually avoid humans unless provoked or desperate. But what scared me was the sound itself. It didn't sound like a bear protecting cubs or a wolf pack defending territory. It sounded alone, hungry, and curious. The fire flickered and almost went out. I shook the lighter, struggling to get it to spark. When I finally did, I fed the flames with more sticks, trying to keep the fire alive and bright. The light pushed the shadows back, but the growling never stopped. It stayed just beyond the trees, not advancing but not leaving either. Hours passed like this. Every now and then, the growling would be joined by the sound of branches snapping, the crunch of leaves underfoot. I didn't dare look out, afraid I would see glowing eyes staring back. At one point, I realized I had stopped breathing. My chest tightened, and sweat broke out across my skin even though the night was cool now. I tried to stay calm, remind myself that panicking would only make things worse. But the situation wasn't calm. The fire was small, barely holding on, and whatever was out there was clearly waiting for me to make a mistake. I decided to wait until dawn. The forest, even dangerous, was less threatening in daylight. I had no way to call for help, no way to run without making noise or leaving my gear. So I stayed inside the tent, holding my knife, listening to the sounds. The night dragged on endlessly. Every little noise sounded amplified in the quiet. The growling stopped a few times but started again each time I relaxed. I counted the minutes until first light. Then, just before the sky began to lighten, the fire finally went out. Total darkness swallowed the clearing. I felt completely exposed, the forest no longer holding back in shadows but wrapping me in black. I heard a crunch just feet from the tent. Something heavy pressed against the thin fabric. My mind raced. I gripped the knife tight, ready for anything. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind swept through the clearing. It blew the tent flap open just a little, letting in the cold dawn air. The wind pushed against the creature or whatever it was outside. After a tense moment, the pressure lifted, and the steps moved away. The sun rose slowly, painting the forest in soft light. I stayed inside, waiting until the growling was gone and the forest quieted. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the clearing was empty. There were tracks, large paw prints in the mud near the edge of the stream. They weren't like any I'd seen before, too big, too deep. I took pictures with my phone to identify later. I packed my gear quickly, never turning my back on the trees. The forest looked peaceful now, birds singing, sunlight filtering through leaves. But I knew better. I knew what had been out there with me. On the hike back to my car, I stayed on the main trail, moving fast, not looking back. I kept checking behind me, half expecting to see those large footprints following. That night, safe in my home, I looked up what the tracks might have been. Experts said they could belong to a large predator, maybe a rogue bear or an unusually big wolf. There were stories in the news about missing pets and livestock in that area recently. Some hikers had reported seeing strange animals too, but no one had caught a clear picture. I never went camping alone again. That night stayed with me, a reminder of how small and vulnerable we really are when we step into the wild. It's easy to romanticize being alone in nature, but sometimes nature reminds you it doesn't care. It's cold, indifferent, and can be terrifyingly real. That summer night changed me. I learned to respect the forest not just as a place of beauty, but as a place with dangers you can't always see. I carry that lesson with me every time I step outside now, knowing that sometimes the scariest things aren't made up. They're just waiting, patient, and watching. I remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. It was one of those summer nights when the air feels warm but still fresh, the kind of night that makes you think about camping under the stars. I had planned a solo trip to a small patch of woods not far from the nearest town. I wanted to get away from everything. No phones, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. I didn't tell anyone where I was going because I liked the idea of disappearing for a while, even if it was just for one night. The day started with me packing my gear carefully. A small tent, a sleeping bag, some food, water, a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a few other essentials. I double-checked everything before I left. The drive to the campsite was peaceful, the roads winding through fields and then into thick woods. When I got there, I parked the car near a small dirt road, then carried my stuff about a quarter mile into the woods, away from the beaten path. I wanted to find a quiet spot where no one would come. The clearing I chose was perfect. It was surrounded by tall pine trees, their branches thick enough to block most of the light from the sky, but not so dense that it felt claustrophobic. There was a small patch of grass in the middle, flat and dry. I set up my tent quickly, hammering the stakes into the ground and stretching the fabric tight. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with oranges and purples. I made a small fire pit out of some stones I found nearby and gathered dry wood. As I worked, I felt the calm of the woods settle in. No cars, no people, just the sound of birds and the wind rustling the leaves. I felt good about being alone. There was something peaceful in the silence that surrounded me. After the fire was going strong, I cooked a simple meal on a small portable stove. I sat back on a log and ate slowly, watching the flames dance. The sky darkened, and the stars began to appear, clearer than I'd ever seen them in the city. I felt small but connected, like I was part of something bigger. After dinner, I cleaned up and crawled into my tent. The air was cool but not cold, and the sound of the fire crackling mixed with the occasional call of a night bird. I lay on my sleeping bag and listened, feeling relaxed. Then I noticed something odd. The silence seemed too perfect, too still. I expected to hear more sounds. Frogs near a stream, the rustling of small animals. But there was almost nothing. I shrugged it off, telling myself the woods just felt different at night. I closed my eyes, but then I heard it. A faint crackling, like a twig breaking not far from my tent. I stayed still, trying to listen. The noise stopped, but then started again. A little louder, closer. My heart rate picked up. I told myself it was probably a deer or some animal moving around. I wasn't afraid yet, but I felt a tension building. The woods were alive, but something about the quietness felt like it was waiting, watching. I grabbed my flashlight from inside the tent and slowly unzipped the door. The fire was almost out, just a few glowing embers left. The night was pitch black beyond the weak light of my flashlight. I scanned the trees around me, focusing on the direction of the sounds. The crackling noises were now closer, coming from the right side of the clearing. I turned the beam towards the trees, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was moving. Nothing, just shadows and branches swaying slightly in the breeze. I kept shining the light for a few minutes but saw no eyes reflecting back. No movement except the trees. I told myself to calm down, that it was probably nothing. Still, I didn't want to leave the tent open. I zipped it up and sat down again, trying to keep my breathing steady. Suddenly, I heard a heavier, crunching noise. Footsteps, slow and careful, stepping on dead leaves. It was different from the crackling of twigs. These steps were bigger, and they were moving around the edge of the clearing. I froze, gripping my flashlight tightly. The beam was still inside the tent, but I wished I had it outside so I could shine it around. The footsteps stopped for a moment. Then I heard breathing, shallow and uneven, coming from outside. I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was an animal or a person. The forest felt enormous, but I was alone. The fire was dead now, the night fully dark. I grabbed my pocket knife from my belt and slid to the tent's entrance, peeking outside just a crack. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the woods nearly black. The steps started again, moving in a circle around the clearing. I wanted to call out, to say something, but my voice felt stuck. I was so tense I barely dared to breathe. Then I heard a sudden snap, loud and close, like someone or something had broken a branch right next to the tent. I jumped back inside, heart racing, and zipped the tent all the way shut. My hands were shaking as I sat on my sleeping bag, trying to think clearly. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, listening to every sound. The footsteps came and went several times, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. I never saw anyone, but the feeling of being watched was real. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself the woods were full of animals, and maybe someone else was camping nearby or just passing through. At dawn, the footsteps stopped. The woods slowly lit up with sunlight filtering through the trees. I peeked outside, but there was no sign of anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches except the one near the tent. I packed my gear quickly, my hands still trembling. As I walked back to my car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The woods felt different in the daylight, less threatening but still heavy with the memory of the night. When I reached the car, I locked the doors and sat inside for a long time before starting the engine. The silence inside the car was a relief. I drove home without stopping, my mind racing with questions. Looking back, I don't think what I experienced was supernatural. There was no ghost, no monster, just something real and human. Maybe someone had been watching me, maybe someone was lost or dangerous. Maybe I was lucky to get out without seeing who or what was there. The woods hold their secrets, and sometimes those secrets are closer than you think. That night taught me something important. Nature is beautiful and peaceful, but it's also unpredictable and wild. When you go alone, you need to be ready for anything. Not just the calm and quiet, but the unknown too. I don't camp alone anymore, and every time I hear a twig snap or footsteps in the dark, I remember that night and the feeling of being watched, completely alone but not really safe. The night I went camping alone was supposed to be a simple escape from everything. I packed my old backpack with the basics, a tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. I chose a remote spot deep in the forest, where I wouldn't have to hear or see anyone else. The plan was to disconnect for a couple of days and just be by myself, surrounded by trees and silence. I arrived late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the tall pine trees. The air was cool, with that fresh smell of earth and pine needles underfoot. The forest floor was soft with fallen leaves and twigs. I found a small clearing, flat enough to pitch my tent, sheltered by thick trees on all sides. I worked quickly, setting up the tent while the light faded, and then started a small campfire nearby. The crackle of the fire sounded loud in the quiet woods. As the sky darkened, stars began to peek through the gaps in the tree canopy. I sat close to the fire, feeling calm and a little proud of being here alone. No city noise, no people, just me and nature. I roasted some canned beans over the fire for dinner. The warmth of the flames and the smell of smoke were comforting. But as the fire died down and the night deepened, the forest became darker and colder. I crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent, zipped it tight to keep the chill out. The forest around me was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal birds. I kept my flashlight close by just in case. I told myself I was safe here. There was no one else for miles. But then I started hearing something else. A slow, heavy crunching of leaves and twigs from somewhere outside the clearing. Not close, but definitely moving toward me. The sound was steady, like footsteps, but uneven. Maybe someone carrying a heavy load or dragging something. My heart started to race, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was an animal. Bears and wolves lived in these woods, but they usually stayed away from people. I unzipped the tent a little and shone my flashlight out into the dark. The beam caught nothing but shadows and trees. The sound stopped. I held my breath, waiting, but nothing moved. I zipped the tent back up and told myself it was nothing, just the wind or a deer. But inside, I felt uneasy. The silence that followed was heavy and strange, like the forest was holding its breath. After a while, I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, slow and deliberate, coming closer to the edge of the clearing. This time, it was accompanied by a low, guttural noise. Not animal, but human? I wasn't sure. My flashlight wasn't strong enough to see very far. I grabbed my small pocket knife just in case. My hands were shaking. I stayed as still as I could, listening. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. The night was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the footsteps started moving again, this time in a circle around the clearing. Far enough not to see the firelight, but close enough to hear every step. I could tell whoever or whatever it was watching me. The wind shifted, and the smell hit me. Sweat, dirt, something like smoke. It wasn't fresh air from the forest. It was the smell of a person who had been living rough, maybe lost or hiding. I realized then how vulnerable I was, alone with only a thin tent between me and whoever was out there. The flashlight batteries were weak, and my phone had no signal, no way to call for help. I stayed awake for hours, barely moving, watching the fire flicker low. The footsteps circled the clearing several times, always just out of the firelight. Once, I saw a faint shadow between the trees. I held my breath. The shadow didn't come closer but stayed there, watching. I thought about packing up and leaving, but it was too dark to navigate the forest safely. I was trapped in my own little circle of light. Around 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent again, except for the crackle of the dying fire and my own breathing. I thought maybe whoever it was had gone. Relief started to wash over me, but just as I was about to close my eyes, I heard a different sound, slow, deliberate tapping on a tree near my tent. Not loud, but distinct. Tap, tap, tap. It was too rhythmic to be random. It wasn't an animal. Someone was out there, right beside me, tapping on the tree. I gripped my knife tighter, feeling sweat run down my face despite the cold. The tapping went on for a few seconds, then stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, the pale light through the trees felt like a rescue. I packed up my gear quickly, eyes scanning the woods for any sign of movement. I didn't see anyone, no footprints around the clearing. It was like whoever had been there had vanished. I made my way back to the trailhead as fast as I could, not daring to stop until I reached my car. Driving away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching ahead. I never found out who or what was out there that night. No one else was around to ask, and there were no signs left behind. But I knew one thing for sure. Some things in the woods don't want to be seen, and some people don't want to be found. That night taught me how thin the line is between safety and danger when you're alone in the wild, and how silence can hide more than just the quiet. After that trip, I never went camping alone again. It was too real, too close. The forest looked peaceful by day, but at night, it held secrets I wasn't ready to face again. And even now, I can still hear that tapping, faint and slow, echoing in my mind. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip. Just me, my backpack, and the woods, nothing complicated. I left the city behind late Friday afternoon, driving until the road narrowed and the trees thickened on either side of the car. I parked at the trailhead where a small gravel lot held a handful of other vehicles, but no one else seemed to be around. It was early enough that the sun still hung high in the sky, casting long golden beams through the pine needles, warming the damp earth. I tightened my boots, slung the pack higher on my shoulders, and stepped onto the narrow path leading deeper into the forest. The air was fresh, heavy with pine and earth, with the occasional sharp tang of decaying leaves. I had chosen this spot because it was off the beaten path. No established campsites, no crowds. I wanted solitude and nature. The trail was overgrown in places, narrow and winding. Every few steps, I heard the crunch of dry twigs beneath my boots or the rustle of small animals disappearing into the underbrush. Birds flitted overhead, their calls echoing between the trunks. It was peaceful, but I kept my senses sharp. I knew the forest held all kinds of creatures, some curious, some dangerous. After an hour of hiking, I reached a small clearing by a slow-moving creek. The water was clear, the surface broken here and there by smooth stones, and bordered by moss-covered rocks. It was the perfect spot to set up camp. I dropped my pack and started to unpack the tent, the sleeping bag, and the small stove I'd brought to boil water. The sun was starting to lower behind the trees by the time I finished setting up. I gathered some dry wood from nearby fallen branches, careful not to take anything alive, and arranged it for a fire. With a match, I coaxed a flame to life, watching it grow until it crackled and sent small sparks into the cooling air. Dinner was simple, a dehydrated meal that tasted better than it should after a long day of hiking. I ate slowly, the firelight flickering on my face as the forest grew darker around me. The creek's soft murmur mixed with the occasional call of a night bird or the rustle of something moving in the bushes. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. The woods were alive in their own way, a world completely different from the noise and lights of the city. I lay back on my sleeping pad, staring up through the mesh ceiling of the tent at the dark canopy. Stars peeked through gaps between branches. A cool breeze whispered across my skin. Around midnight, I was just drifting off when I heard it. A sudden, sharp snap from outside. Not a twig falling under my foot or a branch brushing the ground, but a loud crack, like something heavy breaking. My heart jumped. I lay still, listening hard. The fire was down to glowing embers, and the creek's steady murmur was the only other sound. Nothing else moved. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal, but I couldn't shake the tension. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, shining the beam through the tent's thin fabric into the dark. The light caught a shape near the edge of the clearing, a large figure crouched low. I froze. The shape didn't move. Then it shifted slightly, revealing the dull glint of eyes reflecting the light back at me. Not deer eyes, not any animal I recognized. Bigger, more human. I felt a cold rush of fear. I thought of the stories people tell about people living off the grid. Someone who doesn't want to be found, someone dangerous. My first instinct was to stay quiet and wait for dawn. But the figure moved again, slowly, slipping between the trees, disappearing from view. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't have a phone signal, no way to call for help. I packed the essentials quickly, leaving the fire and the tent behind. Every sound in the forest felt amplified, the snapping of twigs underfoot, the rush of the creek, the crunch of leaves. I kept looking back, but the clearing was empty. I moved fast but quietly, aiming to get back to the trailhead. The moon was rising, casting weak light through the trees, but it wasn't enough to see clearly. I stumbled once or twice, but I didn't stop. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I kept thinking about the eyes, the way they looked when they caught the flashlight. Not animal, not friendly. Something else. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes, I broke through the tree line and saw the empty parking lot ahead. My car was there, just as I left it. I didn't look back. I threw my pack inside, started the engine, and drove without hesitation. Tires crunching on gravel, lights cutting through the dark road. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles down the highway, where bright lights and other people felt like a shield against whatever I had just left behind. The next day, I reported the sighting to the local ranger station. They listened quietly and told me there had been other reports recently. People seeing someone lurking in the woods, watching campers, but no one had caught the person or found evidence beyond footprints or broken branches. They warned me to be careful if I ever came back. I haven't gone camping in those woods since, and I don't plan to. The forest is beautiful and quiet during the day, but at night, it holds secrets better left undisturbed. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't ghosts or monsters. It's the unknown people who live beyond the edge of civilization, watching, waiting, and hidden just out of sight.